Section 1. She had counted the steps to the altar once, a long time ago. 43 steps from the doors of the Ironvale Great Hall to the place where a Luna stood to be claimed. She had counted them as a girl of 18. The week her father brought her to the Thornvale seat for the first time and told her, with the particular gentleness of a man delivering irreversible news, that she would one day walk them. She had stood at the back of the empty hall and counted, quietly, the way she did everything, measuring distances, preparing herself, deciding in advance how long things would take so that when the moment arrived she would not be caught without her footing. She was 22 now. She knew exactly how long 43 steps took. She also knew she would not be walking them today. Her name was Isolde Varen, daughter of the late Lord Cavan Varen, whose eastern borderlands had been folded into the Thornvale Pax territory 3 years ago in an alliance that had required, as all alliances eventually did, a human cost. Her hand had been that cost. Her future, offered across a treaty table to a man who had accepted it with the same expression he probably used when accepting reports from his border commanders. Measured, efficient, already moving on to the next item. 3 years. 3 years of standing at the edges of his world, learning the shape of it without being invited inside. 3 years of watching him from across formal tables, cataloguing the details he never offered directly. The way his hands stilled when he was thinking hard, the slight forward lean when something in a council report finally caught his attention, the single vertical line that appeared between his brows when he was managing something painful and preferred no one notice. She had noticed everything. She had told no one. And now, on the morning of the claiming ceremony that would formally install another woman as his Luna, she stood in front of her narrow mirror in the pale grey of dawn and looked at the white dress laid out on her bed and understood, with the clarity of someone who has prepared for something long enough that preparation has become a kind of grief, that it was time. The dress was not the white of a bride. In Thornvale tradition, white was the color of the surrendered, the color worn by the one who stepped back, who acknowledged the claim of another, who returned to the moon what she had been briefly, provisionally, holding in trust. Isolde had seen it worn once before, at a ceremony when she was 12 years old, by a woman 3 times her age who had walked out of the hall afterward with the careful posture of someone who has decided not to let the watching crowd see the cost. She had thought, at 12, that it looked like courage. She understood now that it looked like courage because the alternative was visible collapse, and some women were simply too proud for that. She reached for the dress. "Don't," said a voice that was not hers. Isolde pressed her hand flat to her sternum, feeling her wolf shift and resettle beneath the pressure like something large turning over in shallow water. "He is ours," the creature said, with the patience of something that has been saying the same thing for 3 years and has not yet decided to stop. "He has always been ours. You know this." "I know what I was told," Isolde said silently. "That's not the same thing." Her wolf went quiet, not convinced, simply waiting, the way wolves wait, without urgency, without deadline, with the absolute confidence of a creature that understands that eventually, the truth surfaces. Isolde put on the white dress. The knock came before she had finished braiding her hair. She knew who it would be before she opened the door. Lady Seraphine Varen had been managing this household since the year Isolde's father died, and she managed it with the thoroughness of a woman who understood that the real work of power is done in small rooms, before the public moments arrive. Her stepmother stood in the doorway with 2 attendants at her back and an expression of careful sympathy that Isolde had learned, over 4 years, to read correctly. The sympathy was the surface. Beneath it, if you looked, and Isolde always looked, was something that tasted of satisfaction. "You're nearly ready," Seraphine said. "Not a question. Nearly. Good." Her stepmother stepped inside without being invited, as she always did, and surveyed the room with the particular attention of someone checking that everything is proceeding according to plan. "I wanted to make sure you understood what today means. Once the surrender is witnessed, once you speak the words and the court records them, the claim is formally dissolved. There's no petition, no appeal, no path back." "I understand," Isolde said. "Your cousin will make him an excellent Luna." Seraphine moved to the window, straightening a curtain that did not need straightening. Verity has always been suited to this kind of life. The ceremony, the court, the responsibility. A pause with too much space in it. Some women are built for it. Others are built for quieter things. Isolde met her own eyes in the mirror. Quieter things. 4 years of being managed into smaller and smaller spaces, and her stepmother still delivered the diminishments with the tone of someone offering comfort. The healer came again this morning, Seraphine continued. I wanted to be certain the reports were consistent before today. Your condition is unchanged, Isolde said. I know. Barren women cannot lead a pack. Her stepmother turned from the window. You know this. The alpha needs heirs. The territory needs succession. What you're doing today is necessary, Isolde finished. You've explained it many times. I want to make sure you believe it. Seraphine studied her with those careful eyes, the color of winter ice, pale and measuring. Not just accept it, believe it. A woman who steps aside with doubt in her face insults the woman who takes her place. Isolde turned from the mirror. I'll be ready by the hour, she said. Her stepmother smiled. Left. The door clicked shut behind her with the soft finality of a trap completing itself. Isolde stood alone in the room and looked at the white dress and thought about the word barren. The way it had been handed to her 3 years ago by a healer she had never met before and had never seen since, with documentation that Seraphine had arranged and Seraphine had filed and Seraphine had referenced in every conversation about Isolde's future since. 3 healers. 3 identical verdicts. All of them Seraphine's. Her wolf stirred again, low and uneasy. Something is wrong, the creature said. Something has always been wrong. It doesn't matter today, Isolde told her. Today is already decided. She finished braiding her hair. She walked to the door. She went to give away the only thing she had ever wanted. The Ironvale Great Hall had been transformed. Isolde had expected it. Verity had been planning this ceremony for 6 months with the focused energy of someone who has been waiting for it far longer than 6 months. But the scale of it still stopped her in the doorway for one unguarded moment. Silver and deep blue everywhere. Thornvale colors made enormous, draped from every surface, wound around every pillar. The scent of winter roses and pine resin hung thick and cold in the air. Verity's choices, precise and deliberate. The aesthetic of a woman who understood that a ceremony is also a statement. The hall was already filling with packed nobility, the low murmur of assembled power filling the vaulted space with the particular sound of people who have gathered to witness something they consider inevitable. Isolde entered through the side passage. Surrendering mates did not use the main doors. She had known this. She had prepared for it. It still felt, in the moment, like more than a logistical detail. Her designated position was near the eastern wall, a small section of floor that had been subtly cleared of other guests, visible enough to fulfill the ceremonial requirement of public witness, removed enough to be, in practice, already forgotten. She found it without help. She stood in it and looked at the hall filling around her and felt the weight of her own invisibility press against her like a physical thing. Isolde. The voice came from her left. She turned. Lord Emmerich Vane was 60 years old and had the face of a man who had survived enough to no longer bother performing anything. He had been her father's closest advisor, one of the few people in the hall who still used her given name rather than her title, and he was looking at her now with an expression of undisguised concern. Lord Vane, she said softly, you shouldn't be here. He kept his voice low, aware of the ears around them. Not like this. There are challenges available to you. The surrender protocol has 3 formal objection pathways that. On what grounds would I object? She asked, gently. I'm barren, Lord Vane. The healers have confirmed it multiple times. He needs heirs. The pack needs. His healers. Lord Vane's jaw tightened. Or hers. The question landed some way old and unhealed in her chest. It doesn't change today, she said. It changes everything about today. His voice was low and urgent. Isolde, I have known your father since before you were born. I knew your mother. I know what the Varen women carry, and it is not. The drums began. The sound rolled through the hall like the first thunder of a storm, and every conversation in the room stopped, and the crowd parted, and Lord Vane's words were swallowed by the momentum of ceremony, and Isolde turned to face the altar and made herself breathe. At the far end of the hall, the main doors swung open. Verity Varen appeared in the frame. She was, Isolde thought, genuinely beautiful. There was nothing manufactured about it. Her cousin had the kind of beauty that required no architecture, silver blonde hair and a face that the hall's candlelight treated with particular generosity. The ceremony gown was deep blue silk and silver thread, floor length, with a train that 2 small attendants managed behind her. She looked like something the Thornvale pack had been building toward for generations. Beside her, offering his arm, walked Isolde's father's brother, her uncle Darren, who had attached himself to Seraphine's orbit in the years since Lord Cavan's death with the reliability of something looking for shelter. He did not look at Isolde as he passed. Neither did Verity. Isolde watched them process toward the altar and felt her wolf howl. Once, low, a sound of pure contained anguish that she absorbed into her sternum and held there, quietly, the way she held everything. And then she looked at the altar, and her breath stopped. Rourke Ashvane, Alpha of Thornvale, stood at the top of the altar steps in the ceremonial charcoal of a claiming ceremony. He was 28 years old and built like the territories he ruled, broad and severe and marked by weather, dark-haired, with pale green eyes that Isolde had spent 3 years learning the precise color of without ever being close enough to confirm it. He was not watching Verity process toward him. He was watching Isolde. Not glancing. Not briefly. Watching, with a fixed, deliberate attention that she had never once seen him direct at her in 3 years, that did not belong to the occasion or the protocol or anything she could explain, and that made something cold and hopeful and terrified move through her all at once. He sees you, her wolf breathed. Finally, he sees you. Stop, Isolde told herself. It means nothing. He is watching you surrender. That is all. The high officiant raised his staff. The ceremony began, and Isolde looked away from Rourke Ashvane's pale green eyes, and stepped forward from her position along the wall, and began the walk she had been preparing for since the moment she understood that preparing was all she could do. The surrender protocol required 3 declarations. Isolde had memorized them. She had practiced them in the dark of her chambers until the words came without effort, because words that require effort sound like resistance, and she had been told, many times, by her stepmother, by the healers, by the architecture of every room she had stood in for 3 years, that resistance was not hers to offer. The high officiant, a silver-haired woman named Barren who had been performing Thornvale ceremonies for 30 years, turned to face her as Isolde reached the center of the hall. Isolde Varen, she said, her voice carrying with the practiced ease of long authority. Former bonded intended of Rourke Ashvane, Alpha of Thornvale. Do you come before this court willingly, to release your claim and acknowledge the claim of another? Isolde's wolf slammed against her ribs. Don't. Please. He is ours and something is wrong with him. I can feel it. There is something dark and wrong wrapped around him. Please don't do this. I come willingly, Isolde said. Do you acknowledge that you are unable to fulfill the duties of a bonded Luna, and that in stepping aside you act in the interest of your pack and your alpha? No, 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 no. I acknowledge it. Then speak the words of release, and let the court bear witness. Isolde opened her mouth. Stop. The word came from the altar. It was not loud. Rourke Ashvane did not need volume. He had the kind of voice that silence gathered around, that rooms reorganized themselves to accommodate. One word, spoken with the particular flatness of absolute authority, and every sound in the great hall ceased as though it had been lifted out by hand. Isolde's head snapped up. He was descending the altar steps, not toward Verity, not toward the officiant, toward her, with the steady, deliberate pace of a man who has made a decision and is in the process of executing it, whose expression gave nothing away except the fact that he was entirely certain of what he was doing and entirely unconcerned with whether the hall approved. Behind him, Verity had gone very still. Rourke. The high officiant's voice held careful confusion. The ceremony requires her declaration before. The ceremony can wait. He reached the bottom of the steps, crossed the cleared center of the hall, stopped directly in front of Isolde, close enough that she could see, for the first time, close enough to confirm, that his eyes were the precise pale green she had spent 3 years estimating from across rooms, and that he looked wrong, not tired, not simply pale, wrong, in the specific way she had not been close enough to notice before. His color was off, a grayness beneath his complexion that had no business being there on a man his age. His breathing was controlled in the way of someone managing something that actively resisted management. And when he had descended those steps, she had seen it, just once, just for a moment, the slight unevenness of his gait, quickly corrected, as though one of his legs had briefly considered not cooperating. He is ill, she thought. How long has he been ill? Your alpha, she started. Rourke, he said. Just his name. Offered to her like something he'd been waiting to give. She stared at him. I am invoking the alpha's right of direct claim, he said, and now he raised his voice enough for the hall to hear, though his eyes did not leave her face. Under Thornvale law, an alpha may claim any mate of his recognition, superseding all prior surrender proceedings. I am invoking that right. He looked at her steadily. Right now. For you. The hall erupted. She heard Verity's voice somewhere in the noise, high and disbelieving, the sound of a careful plan encountering something it hadn't accounted for. She heard her stepmother, sharp and immediate, the voice of someone already calculating. She heard the officiant speaking urgently about protocol, about precedent, about the impropriety of. Rourke held out his hand. Isolde looked at it. She looked up at him, at this man she had watched for 3 years from distances that were always carefully maintained, who had looked through her at every formal dinner, who had barely spoken her name, who was standing in front of her now in a hall full of witnesses with his hand extended and his pale green eyes fixed on her face with an expression she had never seen on him before and could not yet name. "You don't know what I am," she whispered. "What I carry. What it will cost you. I know what I've been without you," he said quietly. "I know what 3 years of watching you from the wrong side of every room has felt like." Something crossed his face, pain, quickly managed. "And I know that today, watching you walk out here to give yourself away, something in me that has been very close to breaking for a very long time finally broke." Her wolf was weeping with recognition. The hall waited. Isolde placed her hand in his. His fingers, cold, she noticed immediately, cold in a way that had nothing to do with the season, closed around hers, and she felt it, faint, buried, wrapped in something dark and wrong, but present. A thread, gold and real. "There," her wolf breathed. "Do you feel it now?" She felt it. She felt it, and she felt the wrongness wrapped around it, and she understood, with a certainty that landed in her chest like something snapping into place, that the thing killing the thread and the thing killing the man attached to it were the same. Someone had done this deliberately, and she was going to find out who. Section 2. The hall was still erupting when Rourke led her out. Not through the main doors. He turned immediately left at the base of the altar steps, moving toward the narrow passage behind the ceremonial partition that separated the public hall from the private corridors of the Ironvale seat. Isolde recognized the route. She had learned every passage in this castle in the 3 years she had spent here as its almost Luna, moving through its spaces with the quiet thoroughness of someone who understood that knowledge of a place is a form of safety. She had never walked this particular passage beside him. 2 of his guard fell into step behind them without being summoned, which told her something about how often he moved through the castle with people trailing him, automatically, without instruction, because it had become necessary. She filed that observation away beside the others. The noise of the hall faded behind the stone. Rourke walked ahead of her by half a step, which she allowed because the passage was narrow and because she was watching him. The set of his shoulders, the slight unevenness she had noticed on the altar steps, present again now, more visible without the ceremony's formality requiring him to perform steadiness. He was compensating. His left side was doing more work than his right, and he was doing it well enough that anyone not watching closely would miss it entirely. She was watching closely. She had always watched closely. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere the council can't follow immediately." He didn't turn. "They'll convene within the hour. I need to speak with you before they find their footing." "Verity. Will be managed." A pause. "That's not what I want to discuss." Isolde absorbed this. The certainty in his voice was familiar. She had heard him use it in council sessions when a decision had been made and the discussion was procedural formality rather than genuine deliberation. She had not expected to hear it applied to her. They turned 2 corners, descended a half-flight of stone stairs, and arrived at a door she recognized as the entrance to one of the castle's smaller receiving rooms, the kind used for conversations that required privacy without the formality of the council chamber or the exposure of the public hall. Stone walls, a cold hearth, 2 plain chairs, no windows. The room of a castle that had been built for function first. He pushed the door open and stood aside for her to enter. She went in, heard him follow, heard the door close, and then she heard something she had not expected. The sound of a man reaching the limit of something he had been carrying for a very long time. It was not dramatic. That was what struck her, the complete absence of drama in the way Rourke Ashvane reached the wall beside the cold hearth and put one hand flat against the stone and simply stopped. His head dropped forward slightly. His breathing, already careful, became more deliberate, the measured cadence of someone counting their way through something. Isolde was across the room before she had decided to move. "How long have you been this bad?" she asked. Don't. She said it quietly, without heat. "Don't tell me you're fine. I've been watching you manage this for at least the last hour and I want to know how long." He looked at her sideways. Something moved through his pale green eyes. Surprise, she thought. the particular surprise of someone unaccustomed to being seen accurately. Months, he said. This specific level. The underlying, longer. Sit down. He opened his mouth. I'm not asking as a courtesy, she said. Your left leg has been compensating for something since you came down those steps, and if you don't sit down in the next 30 seconds, you're going to make the decision for yourself in a less controlled way. A beat of silence. He sat today. Not in one of the chairs. He lowered himself to the low stone bench built into the wall beside the hearth, the kind of seat that required less distance to reach than a freestanding chair, and the fact that he chose it rather than the chair told her more than he probably intended. He was calculating distances. He had been calculating distances for some time. Isolde turned to the hearth. It was cold, not banked, not low, but genuinely cold, as though no one had lit it in days. She found the iron and the wood stacked in the alcove beside it and began building the fire with the efficiency of someone who had learned to tend fires in the years when there was no one else in the house who would. Her mother had been gone by the time Isolde was 15. Her father's decline had followed 2 years later. She had learned practical things in the space those absences created. The fire caught. She built it steadily until the flames were real and producing heat, then straightened and turned back to him. Rourke was watching her with an expression she could not yet read. Not the composed distance she had catalogued across 3 years of formal dinners. Something beneath that, attentive in a way that felt different from observation. The way you watch something you have been trying to see clearly for a long time and have only just moved close enough to manage. She pulled the second chair closer to the bench and sat across from him. Tell me how it started, she said. Directly, he said. Not a complaint. Something else. The faint ghost of something that was not quite a smile on a face that didn't produce them easily. You're different than I expected. You didn't know what to expect, she said. You've barely spoken to me in 3 years. The almost smile disappeared. In its place, something quieter and more complicated. No, he said. I haven't. He looked at the fire she had built. That requires explanation. It does, she agreed. But first, how it started. When? He was quiet for a moment. His hand moved to his chest. Flat, pressing. The gesture she had seen him make in council and had attributed to a habit until this moment when she understood it was management. He was pressing against the pain the way you press against a wound. The night of the betrothal signing, he said. 3 years ago. I woke the following morning with a cold in my chest that I assumed was illness. He looked at her. It didn't pass. 3 years. He had been carrying this for the entire length of their betrothal. Every formal dinner where he had looked past her. Every council session where he had seemed elsewhere. Every corridor crossing where he had offered a nod and kept walking. He had been dying through all of it. Does anyone know? She asked. My head guard, Ferris. My personal healer Win, though I've told her less than she suspects. A pause. His pale green eyes held hers with the careful directness of someone handing something fragile to someone they have decided, in this moment, to trust. And now you. The weight of that landed differently than she expected. Not like a burden. Like a door opening. Why tell me, she said. 3 years of distance and now. Because I watched you walk out into that hall this morning in white, he said, and his voice changed on the last word. Something moving beneath it that his control almost but not quite contained. And something that has been barely holding together for 3 years simply stopped holding. The fire cracked between them. Outside the door, distantly, she could hear the castle beginning to reassemble itself around what had just happened. Voices in corridors, the sound of rapid footsteps, the particular acoustic quality of a court in collective recalibration. None of it mattered yet. I need to look at you, she said. Properly. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. My mother taught me things about wolves. About what it looks like when something is wrong beneath the surface. Things I haven't used in years but... She stopped. Will you let me? Rourke looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. One word. Absolute. She reached out and pressed her palm flat against the left side of his chest, directly over his heart, and closed her eyes. And felt it immediately. The wrong cold of it. The darkness wrapped around something that should have been warm and open and wasn't, that was being squeezed by something deliberate and patient and very, very old. Her breath caught. There, her wolf said softly. Now you see it. Now you understand what we're dealing with. She opened her eyes. Rourke was watching her face. There's something on you, she said carefully. Something that isn't illness. Something that was put there. She held his gaze. Someone has done this to you deliberately. His jaw tightened. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man hearing confirmed what he has suspected for years and has had no way to prove. Can you tell what it is? He asked. Not yet. She kept her palm against his chest, feeling the shape of the darkness, the way it wound and tightened. But I can feel it clearly enough to know it's real. And I can feel something else beneath it. She hesitated. Something that should be much stronger than it is. Something that's been strangled. His hand came up and covered hers, not pulling it away, holding it there. What does your wolf say about me? He asked quietly. Right now. What does she say? Isolde looked at him, this man she had been watching from the wrong distance for 3 years, whose cold hand was covering hers against his chest, whose pale green eyes were asking her a question he already knew the answer to. She says you're mine, Isolde said. She has been saying it since the night we met. Something broke open in his expression, briefly, just for a moment, before the control reassembled itself. But she saw it. She had always seen everything. Section 3. The fire had found its rhythm. It burned steadily now, throwing amber light across the cold stone walls, filling the small room with the particular warmth of something recently coaxed into existence. Fragile at the edges but real at the center. Isolde had not moved her hand from his chest. Rourke had not moved his hand from hers. They sat in the firelight in the specific silence of two people who have just said something true and are deciding, together, what to do with it. Her wolf was very quiet. Not the restless, aching quiet of the past 3 years. The quiet of something that has finally been set down after a long carry. Settled. Present. Waiting to see what came next without the desperate urgency of before. Tell me about the night of the betrothal signing, Isolde said. Rourke's eyes moved to the fire. Something shifted in his profile. Not quite a wince, too controlled for that, but adjacent. The expression of someone revisiting a memory that has not improved with time. We were in the Eastern Hall, he said. Your father and mine had been negotiating the border terms for 2 months. The signing was a formality by that point. The decisions had all been made. A pause. You were standing by the far window when I arrived. You were looking at the grounds outside, and you had the expression of someone who had already calculated every possible outcome of the evening and had made their peace with all of them. Isolde remembered that evening. She remembered the window. She had not known he noticed. I thought you barely registered my presence, she said. I registered everything about your presence. He said it simply, without the weight of a confession, as fact, the way he stated all facts. That was the problem. From the moment I arrived in that hall, something in me that had never behaved that way before became fixed on you. And then we signed the papers and I returned to my chambers and I woke the next morning with the cold. Describe it. Behind the sternum. His free hand pressed briefly against his chest before returning to his knee. Not temperature cold. Something deeper. Like something essential had been dimmed. As though a fire had been banked without my consent. He looked at her. It spread slowly. Over months, then years. There are days when it reaches my hands. Days when it affects my concentration, my ability to shift cleanly. A muscle worked in his jaw. I have managed it. I have managed it carefully enough that the court sees what I need them to see. But managing it has cost things. Like the ability to be present, Isolde said quietly. He looked at her sharply. I watched you in council sessions, she said. You were always there, but there was a quality of distance. As though part of you was working very hard on something no one else could see, and the part available for the meeting was what was left over. She paused. I thought it was simply how you were. I catalogued it as a personality trait. It wasn't. I understand that now. The fire shifted. A log settled with a soft collapse of ember. The cold is different when you're near me, Rourke said. He was looking at the fire, not at her, and she understood this was deliberate, that some truths were easier to deliver sideways. It has been, since the night we met. When you're in a room, the cold recedes. Not entirely. Not enough to forget it's there, but enough to breathe differently. He paused. When you walked into that hall this morning in white, prepared to surrender your claim, I felt the cold reach a place it had never reached before. Something in my chest that I cannot name and cannot afford to lose. Isolde was very still. Your wolf, she said. What has your wolf been telling you? About me. About what I am to you. He turned from the fire and looked at her directly. His pale green eyes were not cold, she realized. They had never been cold. They were careful, which was not the same thing. The eyes of someone who had learned to be very precise about what he allowed to show, because the things he felt were larger than was safe to display openly. "He has been telling me your mind since the night we met," Rourke said. "He has never told me anything else. But every time I tried to follow that, to act on it, to simply look at you clearly and let it be what it was, something intervened. Like trying to hold water. The certainty was there and then it wasn't. Present and then obscured. I thought," he stopped, started again. "I thought I was losing my mind, or that the illness was affecting more than my body." "It wasn't your mind," Isolde said. "No, the bond is being blocked." She said it carefully, watching his face. "I could feel it when I read your chest. There's something wrapped around it, deliberately, precisely. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't just place a curse on you. They placed it specifically on your ability to recognize and reach your mate bond." She felt his hand tighten over hers. "They wanted you blind to me. And they wanted you to die slowly enough that no one would think to look for a cause." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of the shape of what she had just said, of the implications arranging themselves in the space between them, of the specific kind of cold fury that settles in a person when they understand they have been deliberately and patiently destroyed. "The herbs," Isolde said. Rourke looked at her. "My stepmother gives me a tonic every morning. Has done since the year she married my father." She kept her voice level. "For my health," she says. "For the irregularities in my cycle that apparently confirm the barrenness." She looked at their joined hands. "But I have been thinking, since I read your chest, about the way my wolf has always been, muffled. Loud enough to hear but never clear enough to act on. Like hearing a voice through a wall." She met his eyes. "What if the herbs are not for my health? What if they are doing to me what the curse is doing to you, suppressing my ability to feel the bond clearly enough to trust it?" Rourke was very still. "Stop taking them," he said immediately. The alpha's voice, not commanding her, she realized, but responding to a threat with the automatic directness of someone who has spent years making fast decisions. "Starting now. Today. If the barrenness is real." "Is it?" He leaned forward slightly. "Have you ever been examined by a healer who was not brought to you by your stepmother?" The question was simple. The answer was devastating in its simplicity. No, she had not. 3 years of believing herself broken, and every single source of that belief ran through one woman's hands. "I want my own healers to see you," Rourke said. "Women I bring from outside Ironvale entirely, who owe Seraphine Varen nothing." His jaw was set. "Whatever the truth turns out to be, I want it to be the truth. Not a version of the truth that was selected for us." Isolde looked at him. This man she had been surrendering 3 years to loving from a careful distance, who was sitting in a cold receiving room with her palm against his chest and his hand over hers, who looked like he had been slowly dying for longer than either of them had understood. "And if the truth is what she told me?" Isolde asked. "If the healers confirm the barrenness, if there really is no heir possible, then I will die without one," Rourke said. "And I will die having chosen the person I was always meant to choose." Something moved through his pale green eyes, fierce and certain and entirely without performance. "I have been dying by degrees for 3 years, Isolde. I will not spend whatever time remains pretending I don't know what you are to me." Her wolf pressed warm and aching against her ribs. She thought about the tonic on her windowsill, the small dark bottle Seraphine's attendant delivered every morning without fail, that she had taken without question for 4 years because she had been given a reason and had accepted the reason because accepting it was easier than examining it. What if the reason had been the point? What if everything she had been told about herself had been selected, carefully, patiently, over years, to produce exactly the woman who would walk into that hall today in white and give everything away without a fight? "No more herbs," she said. "No more herbs," he agreed. "And healers. Your choice, not mine." "Yes. And whatever we find," she stopped, found the words. "Whatever the truth turns out to be, we face it together. Not as Alpha and his inconvenient betrothed. As what we are," he said. "As what we are." Her wolf made a sound she had no word for. Not a howl. Something quieter and more complete. The sound of a creature that has been running towards something for a very long time and has finally, at the end of a very long distance, arrived. Isolde turned her hand over beneath his. Their fingers interlaced. His were cold. She noted this, filed it, added it to everything else she was building in her mind. The picture of what had been done to him, the shape of the deliberate harm, the patience of whoever had planned it. Someone had spent years dismantling this man by degrees. She was going to spend however long it took building him back. "The council will be waiting," she said. "Let them wait." "Rourke." 5 more minutes, he said. And there was something in his voice she had never heard before. Not the alpha, not the careful composed public face, but something underneath all of that. Something that sounded, very quietly, like a man who has been alone with something enormous for a very long time and has just, for the first time, been offered company. She gave him 5 minutes. She sat with her hand in his cold one and the fire she had built warming the space between them and let the 5 minutes be what they were. Then she stood and straightened and said, "Council." And Rourke Ashvane, Alpha of Thornvale, looked up at her with his pale green eyes and for the first time since she had known him, did not look elsewhere. "Together," he said. "Together," she agreed. And they went to face what was waiting. Section 4. The council chamber was already at full temperature when they arrived. Not warmth. The Ironvale council chamber was stone-walled and north-facing and had never been warm in the years Isolde had known it. Temperature in the sense of pressure, of accumulated human agitation filling a space until the air itself felt charged. 8 council members around the long table, all of them having arrived before Rourke and Isolde, which told her they had moved fast. The speed of people who understood that the first few minutes after a disruption are when the narrative is still being written. Seraphine stood by the window. She was the only person in the room who was not seated, which Isolde recognized immediately as deliberate. Standing gave height. Height gave authority. Her stepmother had always understood the geometry of power in rooms. Verity sat at the far end of the table with her hands folded in her lap and her expression carefully composed into something that was performing dignity while containing something much rawer beneath it. She did not look at Isolde when they entered. She looked at Rourke with the focused attention of someone recalibrating a plan they had been executing for years. Rourke sat at the head of the table. Isolde took the chair at his immediate right. She felt the weight of that, the specific significance of that particular chair, which everyone in the room recognized and which she had been told, implicitly and explicitly, was not hers. She sat in it anyway, kept her spine straight, kept her hands still on the table in front of her. Seraphine's eyes found her immediately. Isolde met them and held. "This is irregular," said Lord Davin, the eldest council member, a broad-shouldered wolf of 6 to 5 who had served Thornvale for 30 years and had the voice of someone accustomed to his irregularity assessments carrying weight. The surrender protocol was underway. The witnessing had begun. To interrupt a formal. "I invoke the Alpha's right of direct claim," Rourke said, "which supersedes surrender protocol under Article 7 of the Thornvale Bonding Code." The interruption was legal. "Legal and advisable are different things," Seraphine said from the window. Her voice was smooth, not the surface smoothness of someone hiding agitation, but the deeper smoothness of someone who has prepared for multiple contingencies and is currently selecting between them. "Your Majesty, the pack requires stability. It requires succession. Lady Isolde has been. Lady Isolde will be examined by healers of my choosing," Rourke said. "Not yours." A beat of silence. Something flickered in Seraphine's expression. Gone before Isolde could fully read it. Replaced immediately by the careful sympathy she deployed so fluently. "The examinations have already been conducted. Multiple times. The results have been consistent and documented. By healers you arranged," Rourke said. "Documented in reports filed through your office." He looked at her steadily. "I want independent verification. From women outside Ironvale who have no prior relationship with this household. You doubt the integrity of qualified healers. I doubt the integrity of a process I had no part in designing." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "The examination will happen. The wedding will be postponed until it does." He looked around the table. "If the results confirm what has been claimed, we will discuss next steps. If they do not," he let the sentence sit unfinished in the room, which was more effective than completing it. Verity's composure cracked slightly. "Just at the edges, just for a moment. You would postpone, again, on the basis of being certain," Rourke said. "Which I believe any bonded alpha is entitled to be before making a permanent decision." He looked at her with something that was not unkind but was also not apologetic. "Verity, what has been done to you today is not something I take lightly. You deserve honesty and you will have it. But I will not complete a bonding I have doubts about simply to avoid discomfort in this room." Verity said nothing. She looked down at her folded hands. Seraphine said, "And if your doubts are unfounded, if the examination confirms everything we have always known about Isolde's condition, then we discuss it," Rourke said. "Together, with accurate information, which is more than we have had." The council exchanged looks, the rapid, loaded eye contact of people recalibrating in real time. Lord Davin cleared his throat. Two of the younger members were watching Isolde with expressions she recognized as reassessment. She had been the displaced woman 30 minutes ago, and she was something else now, and they were updating their files. Seraphine looked at Isolde. The look lasted only a moment. But in that moment, Isolde saw something she had not seen in her stepmother's eyes before. Not calculation. Not the measuring cold that usually lived there. Fear. Small. Quickly covered. But real. Isolde filed it without expression. The council session ended 20 minutes later, inconclusive, adjourned at Rourke's direction until the examination results were available. Members filtered out in ones and twos, taking their recalibrations with them. Verity left without speaking, escorted by her attendant, her spine perfectly straight in the way of someone who has decided that visible dignity is the only remaining currency worth spending. Seraphine was the last to leave. At the door, she paused. "Isolde," she said. "Not your ladyship. Not child." Her name, which was unusual. Her stepmother used names when she wanted to signal intimacy, and she used intimacy when she wanted to remind someone of the relationship's terms. "I hope you understand what you're risking. For him as well as yourself." "I understand perfectly," Isolde said. Seraphine held her gaze for one moment longer than necessary. Then she left. The door closed. Rourke looked at Isolde. "She's frightened," Isolde said quietly. "I noticed. She wasn't frightened before today. In 4 years, I have never seen her frightened." Isolde looked at the closed door. "She's been certain, completely certain that everything was proceeding exactly as she intended. And today," she stopped. "Rearranged. Something about today has introduced a variable she didn't account for." "You," Rourke said. "Me." She turned back to him. "Or more specifically, us. Together. In the same room, talking to each other, comparing information." She paused. "How much do you know about the start of your illness? Not the symptoms. The circumstances. Who was present? What changed?" Rourke was quiet for a moment. "The betrothal signing was attended by 12 people," he said slowly. "My counsel, your father, your stepmother." He stopped. She poured the wine for the toast herself. "I remember because it was unusual. That role normally falls to the hosting household steward, but she stepped in and said something about honoring the occasion personally." The words settled between them like stones placed carefully into still water. "We don't have proof," Isolde said. "No, not yet." She held his gaze. "The healers first. Whatever they find, that's the foundation. We build from facts, not suspicion." He nodded once. Then, unexpectedly, "You're very calm." "I'm not calm," she said. "I'm organized. There's a difference." She looked at her hands on the table. Still, controlled. "My mother died when I was 15. My father 2 years later. By the time Seraphine had been in the house for a year, I understood that visible emotion was information I couldn't afford to give her for free." She paused. "I learned to put things somewhere internal and deal with them later." "And right now," he asked, "what are you putting somewhere internal?" She looked at him. "The fact that someone may have been killing you slowly for 3 years," she said. "And the fact that I spent those 3 years believing I was the problem." Her voice was level. "I'll deal with both of those later. Right now I need to focus on what's actionable." Rourke was quiet for a long moment. "Isolde." "Yes." "I'm sorry." He said it simply, the way he said everything that mattered. "For 3 years of distance that you interpreted as indifference. I need you to know that it wasn't. Every time I tried to." He stopped. "The cold was worst when I tried to focus on you. When I tried to let myself look at you directly and follow what my wolf was telling me, something intervened. Something that felt like fog." He held her gaze. "I was not indifferent. I was being prevented." She absorbed this. The 3 years rearranged themselves slightly, not erased, not made painless, but recontextualized. The nodded greetings in corridors. The brief words at formal dinners. The sense of being looked past rather than at. All of it refracted through a new lens, a lens that made the shape of the deliberate harm visible in the negative space of everything that had not happened between them. "I know," she said finally. I believe you. You shouldn't believe me simply because I say so. I haven't earned. I read your chest, she said. I felt the bond beneath the curse. I felt what's been done to it. She met his eyes. I'm not taking your word for it. I read the evidence directly. A pause. I believe you because the evidence supports it. That's different from blind trust. Something moved through his expression. Something that was becoming familiar to her now. The thing that appeared on his face when she said something that surprised him, and he was deciding whether to let the surprise show. He let it show. Just slightly. The healers will arrive tomorrow morning, he said. I've already sent Ferris to arrange it. He rose from his chair with the careful economy of movement she was learning to recognize as pain management. In the meantime. The herbs, she said. Yes. Isolde reached into the pocket of her white dress. The surrendered color, the color she was still wearing, the color that would not be her color much longer, and withdrew the small glass bottle that Seraphine's attendant had pressed into her hands that morning along with a reminder to take it before the ceremony. She had not taken it. She had not taken it because something, her wolf, her instinct, the small buried ember of doubt that Lord Vane had almost fanned into flame before the drums began, had made her hesitate. She set the bottle on the table between them. They both looked at it. Such a small thing. Dark glass, no label, a wax seal in Seraphine's household color. The kind of object that could be anything. That had been anything, for 4 years, because she had accepted the reason she was given and had not looked further. Rourke reached out and picked it up. He turned it in his fingers, examining the seal, the glass, the color of the liquid visible through the dark. His jaw was set. Tomorrow, he said quietly. The healers will tell us what's in this. Yes, Isolde said. He set it back down. Tonight, he said. You don't take it. No, she agreed. Tonight I don't take it. She looked at the small bottle in the center of the council table. The daily delivery she had accepted without question for 4 years, the small act of managed diminishment dressed up as care, and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not hope. Not yet. But the precondition of hope. The moment when you realize that the thing you believed was fixed might not be fixed at all. That the walls of a particular prison were built by someone with an interest in your captivity, and walls built by interested parties can, with the right pressure applied to the right places, come down. She stood. Get some rest, she said. You're worse than you're showing and you know it. He looked at her. The leg, she said. The breathing. The way you rose from that chair just now. She kept her voice practical, clinical, the tone of someone cataloging rather than worrying. Rest. I'll be in my chambers if anything changes. Isolde. She paused at the door. Thank you, he said. For this morning. For staying. She thought of the white dress. The 43 steps she had counted at 18 and had been prepared to surrender today. The wolf who had been howling mate for 3 years into a fog that someone had manufactured to ensure she never heard the answer. I almost didn't, she said honestly. I know. His pale green eyes held hers. I'm glad you did. She left him there in the council chamber with the small dark bottle on the table between his hands and the fire she had built somewhere behind him still burning. Section 5. The healers arrived before the castle had fully woken. 3 women, traveling without announcement, brought through the servants' entrance on the castle's west side before the morning household had assembled. Rourke had arranged it with the efficiency of someone who understood that timing was its own form of protection. If Seraphine did not know the examination was happening until it was already complete, she had no window in which to intervene. Isolde had been awake for 2 hours already. She had not slept well. Not because of distress, or not only because of distress, but because stopping the tonic had done something immediate and unexpected to her wolf. The creature had spent the night in a state of agitated alertness, pacing the interior of Isolde's consciousness with the energy of something that has been sedated for a long time and is discovering, with increasing intensity, what it feels like to be fully awake. Every scent was sharper. Every sound in the castle corridors carried further. The bond thread she had felt when she took Rourke's hand, that faint gold filament she had barely been able to read through years of fog, was noticeably more present this morning. Not clear yet. Not fully. But closer. She dressed without her attendant, in the deep green of her own choosing. Not the white of surrender, not the formal presentation colors her stepmother had always steered her toward, but the green she had always preferred and had learned to set aside because Seraphine had once described it as inappropriate for formal occasions, and the description had lodged in her behavior the way all of her stepmother's assessments eventually did, quietly and without her full awareness. She was done with that. The examination room was the small infirmary adjoining the eastern residential wing, a practical space, stone-floored, lit by high windows that let in the pale grey of early morning. Rourke had chosen it because it was not a room Seraphine had any customary access to, which mattered. The three healers introduced themselves with the economy of women who valued function over ceremony. Myra, the eldest, was compact and silver-haired with the weathered face of someone who had spent decades reading bodies rather than rooms, and hands that were already moving before she had finished speaking, cataloguing Isolde with the matter-of-fact efficiency of long practice. The second, Roz, was younger, perhaps 35, precise and quiet, the kind of person who listens to everything and speaks only when what she has to say improves on the silence. The third, Haddon, was the youngest of the three and carried a leather case of instruments that she opened and arranged on the examination table with the focused care of someone who loves her tools. "We've been told the previous examinations concluded barrenness," Myra said, not looking up from the notes she was making, "and a hereditary blood compromise. We've been asked to examine independently and reach our own conclusions." She looked up. "We'll need 2 hours. Possibly 3. "Take what you need," Isolde said. They took 2 hours and 40 minutes. Isolde answered their questions, all of them, including the ones that required precision about things she had learned to discuss without emotion because emotion made them harder to get through. Her monthly cycles, her mother's history, her grandmother's, as far as she knew it, the exact composition of the tonic she had been taking, described as accurately as she could from memory, the color of it, the consistency, the slight bitter undertaste she had always attributed to the medicinal herbs Seraphine said it contained. At the mention of the tonic, Roz looked up. She and Myra exchanged a glance, brief, professional, the communication of two people who have worked together long enough to have a shared language that doesn't require words. Isolde noted it, said nothing, waited. When the 2 hours and 40 minutes were complete, Myra set down her instruments and looked at Isolde with an expression that was carefully neutral in the way of someone who has found something significant and is deciding how to deliver it accurately without allowing her own reaction to shape its reception. "Well," Isolde said. "Your reproductive system is healthy," Myra said. "Your womb shows no signs of damage, no structural irregularities, no markers of hereditary compromise." She paused. "Your bloodline, as far as we can read it, carries no curse. No corruption. Nothing that would prevent conception or endanger a child." She held Isolde's gaze. "You are, by every measure available to us, entirely capable of bearing children." The room was very quiet. Isolde sat on the examination table and heard the words and understood them grammatically and felt, somewhere between her sternum and her stomach, the specific physical sensation of a weight she had been carrying for 4 years beginning, slowly, with the resistance of something that has been in place long enough to feel structural, to lift. She had not been broken. She had never been broken. "The previous examinations," she started, "were wrong," Myra said, "or were designed to be wrong." Her voice was even. "The indicators they would have needed to find to reach those conclusions don't exist in your body. They were never there." A pause that had weight in it. "Someone told you something about yourself that was not true." The words rearranged 4 years of Isolde's internal architecture. Not quickly, not cleanly. The way structures come down, piece by piece, each removal revealing how much had been built on the piece beneath it. "Barren," the word Seraphine had used with such consistent, compassionate certainty that Isolde had eventually stopped questioning it and simply incorporated it. The way you incorporate a scar, not liking it, but accepting it as part of the permanent landscape of yourself. Not permanent. Not a scar. A lie, told so many times and by so many arranged voices that it had calcified into something that felt like fact. "There's one more thing," Roz said. Her voice was gentler than Myra's, though no less precise. "We found something in your blood. A compound. Something that has been administered regularly, daily, we estimate, over a period of years." "The tonic," Isolde said. "Yes." Roz opened her notes. "The compound has 2 functions. The first is hormonal suppression. It would interfere with your cycle in ways consistent with the symptoms of barrenness, creating a convincing presentation without any underlying cause." She looked up. "The second function is more targeted. It acts on the wolf's instinctual perception, specifically on the parts of that perception responsible for bond recognition. Mate bond awareness. Isolde was very still. It doesn't eliminate it, Ros continued. It creates interference. Static, if you will. The bond signal is present, but the compound makes it nearly impossible to read clearly. Difficult to trust. Easy to dismiss as wishful thinking. A pause. You would have felt something for years. A pull, an instinct, a wolf that wouldn't stop insisting. But every time you tried to follow it, it would have felt uncertain. Unreliable. Like a voice you couldn't quite hear clearly enough to act on. The fog. 3 years of her wolf-howling mate and Isolde dismissing it, reasoning it away, telling herself it was longing dressed up as instinct and not to be trusted because she was barren and broken and he was being kept from her by her own inadequacy. Not inadequacy. A compound in a small dark bottle delivered every morning by her stepmother's attendant. How long to clear the system? She asked. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that, dimly. You stopped taking it when? Myra asked. Yesterday morning. A week, perhaps 10 days, for full clearance. You'll notice the difference increasing daily. Myra paused. You may have already noticed something. Yes, Isolde said. She thought of the night, the wolf's agitated wakefulness, the sharpened senses, the bond thread noticeably closer than it had been the day before. The compound leaving her system degree by degree, and with each degree, something that had been muffled for 4 years becoming incrementally more audible. She thought of Rourke's hand covering hers against his chest. The cold of it. The wrongness of it. She thought of Seraphine pouring the wine at the betrothal signing. She thought of her father, mild, deferential, a man who had loved his first wife and had grieved her and had, in his grief, allowed someone into the house who had systematically dismantled everything that first wife had left behind. She thought of her mother. Her mother had died when Isolde was 15. A swift decline, 3 months from the first symptoms to the end, a wasting illness the healers at the time had described as rare and untreatable and had attributed to a weakness in the blood that ran in certain family lines. Seraphine had already been present by then, not yet married to her father, but present, managing the household in the way of someone who had positioned herself as indispensable during a crisis. Isolde had been 15 and grieving and had not questioned the timing. She was 22 now. She questioned it. The thought arrived fully formed. The way thoughts do when they have been assembling themselves beneath consciousness for longer than you realized, not as a new idea but as an old one that had finally been given permission to surface. What if her mother's death had not been illness? What if the weakness in the blood that ran in certain family lines had been, like Isolde's own barrenness, a story told by someone with an interest in it being believed? What if her mother had been in the way of something? What if she had possessed something that made her dangerous to the wrong people? Isolde pressed her hand flat against her own sternum, the way her mother had taught her to do when she needed to feel her wolf clearly. What did she carry? She asked the wolf silently. What did our mother carry that made her a threat? Her wolf pressed warm and urgent against her ribs. The same thing we carry, the creature said. The same thing they've been trying to bury in you for 4 years. But what was it? She didn't know yet. Her mother's chambers had been sealed since her death. Seraphine had ordered it, out of grief, she had said, out of respect for the memory. The key lived in Seraphine's keeping. The room had not been opened in 7 years. There were other ways in. Isolde had been 15 when her mother died and had spent the following months learning every passage and forgotten door in the castle the way grieving children sometimes learn the geography of places they have lost someone, mapping the space as a way of staying connected to the person who was no longer in it. She had found 3 ways into her mother's sealed chambers that did not require Seraphine's key. She had not used any of them. She was going to use one tonight. Thank you, she said to the 3 healers. She slid off the examination table. Her legs were steady. She was mildly surprised by this, the way she was mildly surprised each time her body continued to function normally through things that felt large enough to stop it. Your findings, I need them documented. Formally. Signed and dated. Already prepared, Myra said, and produced a folded document from her case. 3 copies. 1 for you, 1 for the Alpha, 1 filed with our own records in Greyvale. She held it out. Whatever happens with this information, it exists independently of this household now. It cannot be unmade. Isolde took the document. She held it for a moment, this small sheaf of papers that contained, in careful healer's notation, the truth of what she was, what she had always been. what 4 years of managed diminishment had tried to bury. She folded it carefully and placed it inside her dress, against her skin. Then she went to find Rourke. She found him in his private study, which she had been in only twice before in 3 years, a room at the top of the castle's north tower with high narrow windows and walls lined with maps and territorial records, a working space rather than a receiving one. He was at the desk when she entered, though not working, seated, elbows on the surface, hands pressed together in front of his mouth in the posture of someone thinking hard about something that isn't on any of the documents in front of him. He looked up when she came in. She crossed to the desk and placed the healer's document in front of him without speaking. He read it. She watched his face as he read, the slight changes in his expression as the information landed, the tightening of his jaw, the moment when he reached the section about the compound in her blood and went very still in the specific way of someone receiving confirmation of something they suspected and finding that confirmation more enraging than the suspicion was. He set the document down. "She poisoned you," he said. His voice was quiet, the particular quiet of contained fury, not the absence of feeling but its compression. "For 4 years, Isolde said. Possibly longer. And the barrenness was never real." "No." He looked at the document, then at her. "Your mother?" "I don't know yet," Isolde said. "But I intend to." She held his gaze. "Her chambers have been sealed since she died. I know a way in that doesn't require Seraphine's key. I'm going tonight." Rourke looked at her for a long moment. "I'll come with you," he said. "You'll slow me down. The passage is narrow and your left side is." "I'll manage." "I go alone," she said. "I'm faster alone and I know the route." She paused, softening the directness slightly. "If I find something, you'll be the first person I bring it to. I promise you that." He held her gaze. She held his back. "Take Ferris," he said finally. "Outside the passage entrance. Not inside. I understand the route won't accommodate it. But outside." "Yes," she agreed. "Outside." She turned to go. "Isolde." She paused. "You said your mother taught you things," he said. "About wolves. About reading what's beneath the surface." He paused. "What else did she teach you?" The question caught her some way unexpected. She stood in the doorway of his study and thought about her mother, about the quiet evenings when her father was occupied with territory business and her mother had sat with her in the small parlor off the east wing and talked. Not about court things, about deeper things, about the women in their family and what they carried and why it had always been important to hide it. She had been too young to fully understand. She was old enough now. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "But I think tonight might tell me." She left him there and went to wait for dark. Section 6. She waited until the second bell after midnight. Not because she needed the cover of deep night specifically, but because she needed the castle's rhythms to have completed their daily cycle. The last of the household staff retired. The corridor guards settled into their rotations. The particular quality of silence that descended on Iron Vale after midnight that was different from evening silence, thicker and more absolute. The silence of a building that had stopped performing wakefulness and had given itself over to dark. Ferris was waiting at the base of the north stairwell when she came down, a broad, quiet man of 50 with the stillness of someone who had spent decades in close proximity to danger and had arrived at a relationship with it that was neither fearful nor reckless but simply matter-of-fact. He looked at her, looked at the narrow passage entrance she was heading toward, and stationed himself without comment at the precise distance Rourke had specified. She appreciated the absence of comment. The passage was behind the third panel of the linen storage room on the castle's second floor, a narrow gap in the stone, invisible to anyone who didn't know what they were feeling for, accessible by pressing the lower right corner of the panel with a specific and deliberate pressure. Isolde had found it at 15, in the months after her mother died, when she had spent her grief learning the castle's hidden architecture. Her mother had shown her the entrance once, years before her death, with the particular offhandedness of someone imparting information they wanted their child to have without making the impartation memorable enough to question. She understood now that the offhandedness had been deliberate. Her mother had been preparing her, quietly, carefully, without enough specificity to be dangerous if overheard, teaching her the geography of escape routes and hidden places and the particular skill of moving through spaces without being tracked. Why? The panel moved. The gap opened. She went through. The passage was exactly as she remembered, narrow enough to require turning sideways in places, stone-floored and cold, the particular cold of spaces that received no light and no warmth and had been that way for years. She counted the distances the way her mother had taught her. 12 paces, left turn, 7 paces, the place where the stone dipped and you had to mind your footing, 4 more paces, and then the wooden panel that opened into the sealed chambers from the inside. She pressed it. It opened. The room beyond was dark and still and smelled of cedar and old lavender and the particular mustiness of a space that had been closed for 7 years without ventilation. Isolde stood in the entrance for a moment and simply breathed it. The ghost of her mother's presence in the accumulated scent of her things, the chairs and books and small personal objects that Seraphine had sealed away and called grief and had actually called inconvenience. She found the candle she had brought with her in her coat pocket and lit it. The room assembled itself in the small circle of light. Everything preserved. Everything exactly as it had been. The writing desk by the window, the bookshelves along the eastern wall, the chest at the foot of the bed still bearing the small carved wolf her father had made for her mother in the first year of their mating. The faded blue coverlet on the bed that Isolde remembered climbing onto as a small child on the mornings her mother let her. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum for a moment. Then she went to the bookshelves. Her mother had been a reader of particular things. Not stories, technical volumes, reference texts, the kind of books that looked unremarkable on a shelf but contained, for someone who knew what they were looking at, a very specific area of focus. Herbalism, bloodline inheritance, the older texts with cracked spines and handwritten marginalia that Isolde had always assumed were academic interests. She pulled them now and looked at the titles properly for the first time with adult eyes. Blood inheritance and its expressions. The architecture of wolf bonds, a practical study. Gifts of the old lines, documentation and suppression. She stopped at the last one. Suppression. Not study. Not celebration. Suppression. The specific word of someone who understood that the thing being documented was a target as much as a treasure. She opened it. Her mother's handwriting filled the margins. Dense, small, the handwriting of someone who thought faster than she wrote and was trying to capture everything. Notes and cross-references and small diagrams and, in several places, passages underlined with such force that the pen had nearly gone through the page. Isolde read the underlined passages first. The Seerbond gift manifests in female lines exclusively. It confers the ability to perceive the threads of wolf bonds directly, mate bonds, blood bonds, curse overlays, with a clarity unavailable to standard wolf perception. The gifted individual can not only see these threads but interact with them, tracing their origins, reading their age and intention, and in the most developed cases, actively unraveling bond-based curses that would be impenetrable to conventional methods. This gift has been documented in 7 family lines across the known territories. In 6 of those 7 lines, the gift has been suppressed, hidden, or eliminated within the past 200 years. The methods of elimination have varied. The motivation has been consistent. The gift represents a direct threat to anyone whose power depends on bond manipulation, curses placed for political gain, false bonds engineered for succession control, mate bond corruption used as a tool of governance. A woman who can see and unravel these things cannot be managed. Therefore she must be made to believe she has nothing to see. Isolde sat down on the edge of her mother's bed with the book in her hands and read the passage again. Then again. The gift manifests in female lines exclusively. Her mother had it. Which meant, she turned to the next underlined passage. The suppression method most commonly employed against gifted women in the current era is compound-based. A botanical preparation, administered daily over an extended period, creates sufficient interference in the wolf's instinctual perception to render the gift functionally inactive. The woman retains the gift, it cannot be removed, only silenced, but experiences it as nothing more than vague instinct, dismissed as ordinary wolf sensitivity. The compound was first documented in the formularis of. The page had been torn here, not by accident, deliberately removed, a clean tear along the binding, the kind made by someone who knew exactly which information they wanted to excise. Isolde looked at the torn edge for a long moment. Then she turned to the writing desk. Her mother's desk was as she had left it, inkwell dried, blotter bearing the ghost impressions of letters long since dispatched, the small objects of a working surface arranged with the habitual tidiness of someone who spent a great deal of time at it. Isolde opened the center drawer. Empty. She opened the left drawer. Empty. She opened the right drawer, and found it locked. She checked beneath the desk's center shelf. Her fingers found the small key taped there with the particular placement of someone who hid things in ways that were findable by the right person and invisible to everyone else. Her mother had shown her this hiding place too. 7 years ago. Offhandedly. She used the key. The drawer opened. Inside, a letter, folded and sealed with a wax impression Isolde recognized as her mother's personal mark. The small wolf's head that had been on every letter her mother had ever written her. And beneath the letter, a small vial of dark glass, sealed with silver wax, with a label in her mother's careful hand. For the cold that shouldn't be there. 7 drops, 7 nights. Isolde's breath left her. Her mother had prepared this. Her mother had known. She picked up the letter with hands that were not entirely steady and broke the seal. My darling Isolde, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the room has been closed long enough that whoever closed it has stopped watching for you to open it. I am glad you found the way in. I taught it to you for exactly this reason, though I could not tell you so at the time. There are things I should have told you when I had the chance. I ran out of time before I understood quite how little I had. So I am leaving you this instead, and hoping that when you find it you will be old enough and ready enough to understand. You carry a gift. It came to you from me, and to me from my mother, and through her from a line of women who understood what it was and kept it quiet because quiet was the only thing that kept them safe. The gift allows you to see the threads that bind wolves to each other, mate bonds, blood bonds, the dark work of curses placed for power. You can see them clearly, and you can do more than see them. You can unravel them. This is why you have always felt things others didn't. Why your wolf has always been louder and more insistent than seemed reasonable. Why you have sometimes placed your hand on someone's chest and felt something moving beneath the surface that you had no name for. That is the gift. That is what you are. It is also why someone is going to try to make you believe you are nothing. I cannot tell you everything I know. I am writing this in haste and I am not certain how much time I have. But I can tell you this. The woman who has positioned herself so carefully in your father's house is not what she appears. She knows what you carry. She has known since before she arrived. Everything she has done, and will do, is in service of ensuring you never understand what you are capable of. Do not take anything she gives you. I have left you the antidote in this drawer. It will address the suppression compound if you have been given it, and it will help with the cold that someone will use as a weapon against the person you are meant to love. 7 drops, 7 nights, and the warmth will begin to return. There is a woman in the village of Marin's Crossing, 3 hours east of Vale, who knew our family long before I did. Her name is Corva. She is old and she is not always easy, but she knows everything I know and more besides. Find her when you are ready. You are not broken, my love. You have never been broken. You have been managed by someone who was afraid of what you would become if you were left whole. Become it anyway. Become all of it. I love you. I will love you from wherever this goes. Your mother. Isolde read the letter once. Then she sat in the dark of her mother's sealed chambers with the candle burning low on the desk beside her and let herself feel, for exactly 60 seconds, the full weight of what it meant. Her mother had known, and had been taken before she could finish preparing her daughter, and had done what she could in the time she had. Hidden the antidote, hidden the letter, hidden the key beneath the shelf in the place only Isolde would know to look, and trusted that her daughter would eventually find her way to this room. 7 years. It had taken 7 years and a displacement ceremony and a dying alpha and a wolf who had refused to stop howling into the fog. You found it, her wolf said softly. You found her. She gave herself 60 seconds. Then she folded the letter carefully and placed it inside her coat against the healer's document, against her skin. She picked up the dark vial, 7 drops, 7 nights, the cold that shouldn't be there, and held it in her closed fist. She thought of Rourke in his study at the top of the North Tower, pressing his hand against his chest to manage the cold that had been placed in him the night of their betrothal signing. 3 years of that. 3 years of carrying something that had been put in him by someone who needed him to die slowly enough that the cause would never be examined. Her mother had prepared the antidote. Her mother had left it here for her. She ran. Not carelessly. She moved through the passage quickly but without noise, counting the distances in reverse, emerging from the linen storage panel into the corridor where Ferris was waiting with the patient stillness of someone who had been in exactly that spot for 2 hours and would have remained for 2 more without complaint. I need to see him, she said. Now. Ferris looked at her face. Turned. Led. Rourke was not asleep. She had not expected him to be. The study was still lit when she reached the tower, the door open, and he was at the window rather than the desk now, standing in the dark with one hand against the stone and his breathing audible from the doorway. Worse than earlier. She crossed the room directly and took his arm without asking, bearing enough of his weight to feel how much he needed it. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She crouched in front of him, uncapped the vial, looked up at his pale green eyes, shadowed and exhausted and still, despite everything, entirely focused on her. "My mother left this," she said. "For exactly this. Trust me." "Yes," he said, without hesitation, without qualification. She administered 7 drops carefully, one at a time. Then she placed both hands flat against his chest, over his heart, over the cold, over the bond thread being strangled by something deliberate and patient. And she closed her eyes and she reached. She found the thread, gold and present and fighting. She found the darkness wrapped around it. She found, for the first time, something she had not found before, a sense of the darkness's architecture, its construction, its age. It had been built with considerable skill by someone who understood exactly what they were doing. A slow curse, designed for patience rather than speed. A curse that could wait years, that fed on time, that had been given a kill switch for the moment it could no longer afford to wait. She traced its edges carefully. She was not ready to unravel it yet. She was not certain she had the skill, or the knowledge, or the right preparation. She needed Corva. She needed her mother's books. She needed time she was not sure Rourke had. But she could see it now, clearly, fully, without the fog of the compound in her blood blurring everything. She could see it. And a thing seen clearly, her mother had once told her during one of those quiet evenings in the East Wing parlor, is a thing that has already begun to lose. She opened her eyes. Rourke was watching her face. "I know what was done to you," she said. "I know its shape, its age, its construction." She held his gaze steadily. "I know who made it. And I know what I need to learn to take it apart." She paused. "I'm not ready yet. But I will be." His hand came up and covered hers where they rested against his chest. "How long?" he asked. "Soon," she said. "Days, not weeks." She looked at him. "But there's something else you need to know. The kill switch." "Tell me." She told him. All of it. The letter, the gift, the antidote, the kill switch her mother had described only in outline but that Isolde had felt clearly when she read his chest. If the bond was ever fully completed before the curse was removed, the completion would feed the curse rather than resolve it. The bonding would kill him. Rourke was quiet for a long moment after she finished. "We wait," he said. "Yes. We dismantle the curse first." He looked at her. "And then we complete the bond properly, without anything wrapped around it." "Yes," she said again. He nodded once. Then, quietly, "She loved you very much. Your mother." Isolde looked down at their joined hands, his cold and fighting, hers warm and learning. "She did," she said. "She left me everything she could in the time she had." She paused. "We're going to make sure it was enough." Section 7. 3 days passed in the particular blur of purposeful urgency. Not chaos. Isolde had no patience for chaos, had learned young that urgency and disorder were not the same thing and that conflating them was how mistakes got made. She moved through the 3 days with the organized focus of someone who has a list and is working through it in the correct order, and she kept Rourke informed of each step, and she did not allow herself to think too far ahead of the current task because ahead of the current task was a horizon she could not yet fully see and looking at it before she was ready would not make it closer. The first day she spent with her mother's books. She read everything, not quickly, not skimming, but the way her mother had apparently read everything, with a pen in hand and full attention, making notes in the margins of her own notebook in the same small dense handwriting she had inherited without knowing it. She cross-referenced the books against each other, built a picture from the overlapping information, and by the end of the first day had a working understanding of the gift she carried that was more complete than anything she had assembled from the fragments of her mother's offhand teachings. The Seerbond gift. The ability to read the threads of wolf bonds directly, to see them, trace them, understand their construction and age and intention, and in the most developed expression of the gift, to actively unravel curse bonds that had been placed for deliberate harm. She had been using it instinctively for years without knowing what it was. Every time she had placed her hand on someone's arm and felt something moving beneath the surface. Every time her wolf had showed her something she couldn't explain in conventional terms. Every time she had known, with a certainty that had no rational basis, that something was wrong with a person or a situation or a bond. Not instinct. Not sensitivity. A gift, old and rare and deliberately buried by someone who understood its implications. On the second day she went to Marin's Crossing. She took Ferris and rode fast and arrived at the village by mid-morning, and found Corva exactly where her mother's letter had implied she would be, in a small stone house at the village's eastern edge, surrounded by a garden that was not decorative and a workroom that was not a kitchen. An old woman of 70-something with white hair and sharp dark eyes and the expression of someone who had been waiting for a specific visitor for a very long time. "You look like Elith," Corva said when she opened the door. Her mother's name, in the mouth of someone who clearly loved it. A bit harder around the eyes. "But you have her hands." She let Isolde in. They spent 6 hours together. Corva taught with the economy of someone who understood that time was the only resource that could not be recovered. No ceremony, no build-up, simply information delivered with precision and the occasional sharp correction when Isolde reached for the wrong analogy. She taught Isolde how to move within the gift rather than simply observe through it. How to trace a curse thread from symptom to source. How to identify the anchor points, the places where the curse's construction was load-bearing, where unraveling had to begin, where the wrong pressure applied in the wrong order would cause the structure to collapse inward rather than dissolve. And she taught her about kill switches. "They are rare," Corva said. "Building one requires considerable skill and considerable spite. The maker has to anticipate a specific trigger and engineer the curse to respond to it. The trigger in this case. The completed bond," Isolde said. "Yes. The curse was designed to feed on the bond energy. A completed bond releases an enormous amount of energy, the strongest force in the wolf world. Whoever made this curse intended to use that energy to accelerate the killing mechanism." She looked at Isolde over her tea. "Which means it was made by someone who knew he had a true mate. Someone who knew the bond existed and decided to use its completion as the delivery mechanism for his death." "So they knew about me," Isolde said. "They knew about the bond. Whether they knew specifically about you." Corva set down her cup. "The curse was placed 3 years ago," you said. "Before your arrival at Iron Vale. The night of the betrothal signing. Before I came to live at the castle." Corva was quiet for a moment. "Someone knew the betrothal would create proximity," she said finally. "And proximity between true mates, even with the bond suppressed, eventually produces recognition. They built the kill switch as insurance." She looked at Isolde steadily. "They were very thorough." "Yes," Isolde said. "They were." She returned to Iron Vale by evening with 6 hours of Corva's teaching organized in her mind alongside everything her mother's books had given her, and she sat with Rourke in the council chamber. Empty at that hour, fire burning low, the rest of the castle settling into its midnight rhythms, and she told him what she had learned. He listened without interruption. When she finished, he said, "Can you do it?" "Yes," she said. And then, because she had promised him honesty, "I think so. I'm more certain than I was this morning, and I'll be more certain tomorrow." She paused. "I need one more night with the books. And I need you to keep taking the antidote. It addresses the physical deterioration while I work on the curse structure itself. They have to work together." "All right. And there's one more thing." She held his gaze. "The bonding. We can't complete it until the curse is gone. You know that. But Seraphine is going to move against us. She saw the fear in that council chamber and she knows her plan is unraveling." She paused. "We need to do something that makes it harder for her to interfere. Something that gives us a formal standing before the pack that she can't easily challenge." Rourke looked at her. "A partial ceremony," he said. "The declaration, without the bonding bite. Witnessed by people we trust. Yes, not a legal bonding in the full sense, but a formal public declaration, a statement of intent that the pack can witness and record." She paused. "It protects us both. It establishes that you have formally claimed me and I have formally accepted, so that any move she makes against me becomes a move against the Alpha's declared mate." He was quiet for a moment. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Tomorrow morning," she agreed. The declaration ceremony was held in the small chapel at the castle's eastern end before the household was fully awake. 8 witnesses. Lord Vane, who had been waiting for something like this for 3 years and arrived 12 minutes early with the expression of a man who has decided to be present for the moment regardless of what it cost him. Ferris, solid and silent at the back of the room. The 3 Greyvale healers, still in residence, who had earned their place in this particular room by telling the truth when it was inconvenient. 2 junior council members who had shown, in the recalibration after the ceremony hall, a willingness to follow evidence rather than existing alliance. And Rourke's personal healer Wynne, a small precise woman of 40 who had been managing Rourke's illness in careful secret for 2 years and who, When Isolde had approached her the previous day and laid out everything she knew, had sat in silence for a long moment and then said, "I have been waiting for someone to come to me with this for a very long time." Isolde dressed in the deep green she had worn the day before. Not ceremony clothes. There had been no time to prepare ceremony clothes, and she did not want ceremony clothes, did not want the performance of it, wanted only the reality. Rourke was at the front of the chapel when she arrived. He looked better than he had 3 days ago, the antidote working degree by degree, the color returning slowly to his face, the gray undertone not gone but reduced. His pale green eyes found her the moment she entered and stayed on her with the fixed, deliberate attention she was learning to recognize as his particular expression of something he would not yet say in words. There was no processional. She simply walked to him. Lord Vane stood beside her. She had not asked him. He had appeared at her chamber door that morning and said, quietly, that her mother would have wanted someone who loved her family to stand at her side today. She had let him. The officiant, Wynne, who held the secondary qualification for pact declarations that healers in Thornvale were required to maintain, kept the words simple. Rourke Ashvane, Alpha of Thornvale. Do you declare this woman as your chosen mate and intended Luna, before these witnesses and this pack? I declare it, Rourke said, freely and without reservation. Isolde Varen. Do you accept this declaration and return it in kind? She looked at him. She thought of the 43 steps she had counted at 18. The white dress she had been given to surrender in. The 4 years of careful diminishment, of being made smaller by degrees, of believing the smallness was her own shape rather than a shape that had been pressed onto her. I accept it, she said, freely and without reservation. Wynne nodded once. Let it be recorded. The declaration is witnessed and stands. No bonding bite. No completed ceremony. But real, formally recorded, formally witnessed, the pact's acknowledgement of what was true. Rourke reached out and took her hand. His fingers were still cold. She held them anyway. Soon, she said quietly, meant only for him. I know, he said. She spent the 3rd night with the books and emerged from it with the certainty she had promised herself. She understood the curse's architecture completely now, its anchor points, its load-bearing structures, the precise sequence in which it needed to be unraveled to dissolve rather than collapse. She had practiced the reaching and reading with Corva's teaching organized in her mind, had felt through Rourke's chest each evening and tracked the curse's response to the antidote, had mapped the places where the structure was already weakening. She was ready. She found him at dawn in his study. Today, she said. He looked up from the window where he had been watching the sun rise over the Thornvale territories, those broad, cold, beautiful lands that he had been ruling while dying for 3 years. Something in his expression shifted at the word. Not fear. Not relief. Something between them that she was learning to read as his particular form of hope. Cautious, contained, the hope of someone who has been disappointed enough to handle it carefully. Tell me what you need from me, he said. Sit, she said, and trust me. He Saturday. She stood in front of him and placed both hands against his chest, fully, deliberately, with the complete attention of everything she had spent 3 days learning. She felt the bond thread immediately, felt the darkness wrapped around it, felt the kill switch coiled in the curse's deepest structure, patient and waiting. She reached for the first anchor point. The curse pushed back. She had expected this. Corva had warned her. The books had documented it. A curse of this complexity and age had its own momentum and would resist unraveling with something that felt almost like intention. She pressed through the resistance not with force but with the precision Corva had taught her, finding the structural weakness and applying pressure exactly there, and felt the first thread of the curse's outer layer begin to give. Steady, her wolf said. You know what you're doing. Your mother's hands. Use your mother's hands. She worked through the outer layer thread by thread. It took longer than she had hoped and exactly as long as she had calculated. 40 minutes of sustained, focused effort that left her trembling slightly with the exertion of it, sweat at her temples, her whole body oriented toward the task with a single-mindedness she had not known herself capable of. The outer layer dissolved. She moved to the second anchor point. This one was deeper and more complex, the structural heart of the curse, the place where most of its weight was held, the place where the kill switch lived. She could feel it clearly now that the outer layer was gone, coiled and waiting, and she approached it with the care of someone diffusing something that had been designed to respond to careless handling. She did not handle it carelessly. She traced its edges, found the beginning of the thread, began to unravel it from the outside in, the way Corva had shown her, keeping the unraveling controlled and even so that the structure dissolved rather than collapsed. The curse fought her harder here. She held on. She thought of her mother's letter. Become it anyway. Become all of it. She thought of 4 years of being made to believe she was nothing, barren, broken, a woman whose best contribution was stepping aside. She thought of Rourke's cold hand covering hers in the small receiving room, the first time he had let someone see past the management to what was actually happening. She wove all of it into her hands. Not as metaphor. Literally. She let the feeling of it move through her palms and into the work, the way Corva had described, the gift amplified by genuine stakes rather than diminished by them. The second anchor point gave. The cursed structure shuddered. She went for the kill switch directly. It resisted with everything it had, a sudden surge of cold that moved up through her palms and into her arms and chest, the curse spending its remaining strength in one concentrated push. She felt it hit her wolf and heard the creature snarl in response. Not pain, she realized, but outrage, the specific fury of something that has been patient for a long time and has finally been given permission to respond. She pulled. The kill switch came apart. And then, in the space of a single breath, the entire remaining structure of the curse dissolved, and she felt warmth flood back through the connection between her palms and his chest, and Rourke made a sound she had never heard from him before, a short, sharp exhale that contained 3 years of cold finally leaving all at once. She opened her eyes. He was looking at her. Color in his face, real color, not the careful performance of it but the actual living warmth of a man whose body has just remembered what it was supposed to feel like. His pale green eyes were bright. Not with tears, with something more complete than tears. The expression of someone who has been standing in cold water for 3 years and has just stepped onto dry ground and cannot quite believe the ground is solid. It's gone, he said. His voice was different, fuller, she realized, the compressed quality it had carried gone with the cold that had been compressing it. It's gone, she confirmed. She became aware that she was also trembling, not with fear, with the aftermath of sustained effort, her body accounting for the energy the work had cost. Rourke's hands came up and caught her shoulders, steadying her, and she let him, and they stayed like that for a moment in the morning light of the study window. The bond, he said quietly. I can feel it clearly. For the first time. I can feel it completely. She felt it too. Not the strangled, fog-wrapped thread she had been sensing for days, but the real thing, warm and golden vast, running between them like a river that has finally been given its proper channel. Her wolf pressed against it from her side and felt his wolf press back from his, and the recognition between the two creatures was so complete and so long overdue that it moved through Isolde's chest like something being set right after a very long being wrong. The declaration stands, she said. But the bonding? Tonight, he said. With witnesses. Properly. He looked at her with those newly clear pale green eyes. You are not surrendering into this. You are choosing it with full knowledge and full power. He paused. I want that to be visible. I want there to be no version of this that looks like you had no choice. She looked at him. Tonight, she agreed. The bonding ceremony was held in the same small chapel as the declaration, by the same 8 witnesses, in the same absence of performance or ceremony beyond what was genuine. Isolde wore the deep green. Rourke wore no formal coat, simply the dark shirt he had been wearing all day, the one that had been against his skin through 40 minutes of curse unraveling, which felt right in a way she couldn't entirely articulate. Wynne read the full bonding rites. They answered. When the time came, Rourke tilted her head with one hand and she felt his breath against her pulse and then his teeth, and the pain was sharp and brief, and then it was something else entirely. A door opening, a channel cleared, the bond she had been feeling for 3 years in fragments and fog suddenly running full and warm and complete between them. She felt him. Not just physically. Him, the full interior of him, the things the careful controlled exterior had been managing for years. The depth of his relief. The wonder of someone experiencing something long desired and still slightly unable to believe it was real. The warmth of his wolf finally settled around her wolf, finally home. Finally done reaching through fog for something it could now hold completely. There, his wolf breathed through the new connection. There you are. I have been trying to reach you for so long. I know, she said. I'm here now. She mocked him in return, and felt through the bond the way his breath changed completely, the way 3 years of cold and management and careful performance dissolved into something that required none of those things. What the old blood binds, Wynne said quietly, let nothing sever. The 8 witnesses were silent for a moment. Then Lord Vane began to clap, slow and deliberate and entirely certain, the applause of someone who has been waiting for a specific thing and is grateful to have lived to see it. Rourke's hand found hers. Warm. Finally, genuinely, completely warm. Section 8. The morning after the bonding, Isolde woke to warmth. Not the managed warmth of extra furs or a fire built against necessity. Genuine warmth. The warmth of a body beside hers that was no longer fighting its own temperature, that had spent the night radiating heat the way a healthy wolf was meant to. She lay still for a moment in the early grey of pre-dawn and simply felt it, this ordinary miracle, the warmth of a man who had been cold for 3 years finally running at his proper temperature. Rourke was awake. She could feel it through the bond, the quality of his consciousness different in wakefulness than in sleep, more organized, the particular attentiveness of a man whose mind moved quickly and had already begun the day's accounting before his body had fully committed to being vertical. She could feel his awareness of her wakefulness too. The bond ran both directions with the clarity of a clean channel, no fog, no static, no strangled half-signals. What she felt, he felt. What he felt, she felt. It was, she thought, going to require some adjustment. Not unpleasant adjustment. You're thinking loudly, he said. His voice was different in the morning, less composed, the careful architecture of his public voice not yet fully assembled. She filed this detail with the same thoroughness she filed everything. I'm thinking about the bond, she said. What about it? That it's going to take some learning. Running this open after years of fog. She paused. I can feel your mind already cataloguing the day. A moment of silence. I can feel you noticing that, he said, with the ghost of something that was becoming, gradually, more recognizable as humor. Which means we're already in the mutual observation problem. We'll adapt, she said. We will. He turned onto his side to look at her, and in the grey morning light she could see what 3 years of curse removal and 1 night of completed bonding had done to his face. The sharpness softened slightly, the careful management absent in a way it never had been in any of the 3 years she had spent watching him from across rooms. He looked younger. He looked like a man who had slept without managing anything for the first time in a very long time. How do you feel? Strong, she said, and was surprised by how completely true it was. Clearer than I have in years. She pressed her hand to her sternum. Her wolf was fully awake and fully present in a way that still felt new, the compound leaving her system day by day and with each day another degree of clarity. The gift is stronger this morning. After last night. The bond amplifies it. I think so. Corva mentioned it. She said a completed bond was a grounding mechanism for the gift. It gives it an anchor. She paused. I'll need to test that properly. Understand the new parameters. After breakfast, he said firmly. You worked for 6 straight hours yesterday and you need to eat something before you do anything else. She looked at him. Are you going to be managing my meals now? I'm going to be ensuring you eat them, he said, with the absolute calm of a man who has made a decision. Which is different. It's really not. Eat breakfast, he said. Then test your parameters. She ate breakfast. Seraphine moved against them on the 4th day. Not overtly. Isolde had not expected overt. Her stepmother did not operate in the open when the shadows were available. What Seraphine did was quieter and more considered. A petition, filed with 3 senior council members, requesting a formal review of the declaration ceremony on the grounds of procedural irregularity. The petition was careful and specific, citing 3 separate provisions of Thornvale Bonding Code, written in the language of genuine legal concern rather than the language of personal interest. It was, Isolde had to admit, well constructed. She's not challenging the bond, Lord Vane said, reading the petition in Rourke's study while Isolde stood at the window and Rourke sat at his desk with the expression of a man containing something he has decided not to express until he knows the full shape of it. She's challenging the procedural validity of the declaration that preceded it. If she can establish that the declaration was improperly witnessed or formally irregular, she can argue that the bonding ceremony that followed it was conducted under false premises. And if the bonding is challenged, Rourke said, it would go to a full council review, which means weeks of proceedings, during which the bond's formal standing is in question. Lord Vane set the petition down. It also means public scrutiny of the circumstances, the healer's examinations, the questions about Lady Isolde's condition, questions that were apparently answered by a set of independent healers in direct contradiction of previous findings. She wants the scrutiny, Isolde said from the window. She's not expecting to win the petition. She wants the process, the weeks of proceedings, the public questioning, the opportunity to plant doubt. She turned. She knows the healer's findings exist. She knows the evidence against her is building. The petition is a delaying action. Delaying for what? Rourke asked. Time to eliminate the evidence. Or the witnesses. Isolde held his gaze. Or both. The room was quiet. The healers, Rourke said immediately. He was already reaching for the pen on his desk. I want them moved today. Not just within the castle, out of Ironvale entirely, back to Greyvale, with a full security escort. Already arranged, Ferris said from the doorway, with the equanimity of someone who had anticipated this development and had not waited to be asked. They left an hour ago. Copies of the examination documents are filed in 3 separate locations: Greyvale, the Mountain Archives, and with Lord Vane personally. Isolde looked at Ferris with something approaching profound appreciation. The petition still needs a response, Lord Vane said. A formal response, within 5 days, or the review proceeds by default. We'll respond, Rourke said. With everything we have. He looked at Isolde. Including the cursed documentation. Yes. She turned back to the window. The Thornvale territories spread below, those broad, cold, beautiful lands, the forests and the river valleys and the border ridges she had been looking at for 3 years from the wrong side of every window. It's time to stop responding and start moving forward. What are you thinking? Rourke asked. I'm thinking that Seraphine has been 3 moves ahead of everyone in this household for 4 years because she has been the only person who knew the full shape of the plan. Isolde turned. We know the full shape of it now. The curse, the compound, the false healer's reports, the betrothal signing, my mother. She paused. And we have documents. Signed, dated, independently filed, impossible to unmake. She looked at him steadily. We don't need to wait for her to move against us again. We call the council. We present everything. We let the evidence speak in a room where it cannot be controlled or managed. She'll deny it, Lord Vane said. Let her deny it against signed contracts and healer's documentation and a bond curse I can describe in detail because I spent 40 minutes unraveling it myself. Isolde kept her voice level. Denial without countervailing evidence is just noise. Rourke looked at her for a long moment. 3 days, he said. Give me 3 days to prepare the council session and ensure the right people are in the room. He paused. And give me 1 day before that. For what? To take you somewhere. He took her to the eastern ridge. She had never been. It was outside the formal castle grounds, a 2-hour ride through the Thornvale forest along trails that Rourke navigated with the ease of someone who had been riding them since childhood. The forest was old and dense and the particular dark green of a place that received enough rain to sustain itself without effort. And riding through it, Isolde felt the gift respond to the density of life around her. Not wolves, not bonds, but the general aliveness of the place, the accumulated presence of a very old ecosystem. They came out of the forest onto a ridge that looked east across the full breadth of the Thornvale territories. The morning was clear and cold, and the light was the particular gold of Autumn Hill country, and the territories spread below them for miles in every direction. The river valley to the south, the border ridges to the north, the village clusters she could identify by their smoke patterns, the roads she had learned by map but was only now seeing from above. She sat on her horse and looked at all of it and felt something she hadn't expected. Not ownership. Not the abstract sense of responsibility that the word territory implied. Something more personal. The feeling of a landscape that was asking to be known, that was extending itself to be read by someone who was ready to read it. My father brought me here when I was 8, Rourke said beside her. The morning after he formally named me his successor. He didn't say anything. We rode up here and he let me look at it and we rode back. He paused. I understood later that it was the only thing he knew how to give me. The full sight of it. So I would know what I was holding. What were you holding? She asked. He told me later. He said, you're not holding land, you're holding lives. The land will be here regardless. The lives are the thing you can lose. He looked at the territories below. I have been thinking about that for 20 years. I have been holding this as carefully as I knew how while something was slowly taking my ability to hold it at all. Isolde looked at his profile. This man she had been given to as a treaty seal and had loved from a careful distance and had almost surrendered and had chosen deliberately instead, whose cold she had spent 40 minutes dismantling thread by thread, whose bond she could feel warm and clear and constant through their new connection. You held it, she said. We'll hold it better together, he said. She thought of her mother's letter. Become it anyway. Become all of it. She thought of the 43 steps she had counted at 18. She thought of the white dress folded in a chest in her chambers, the color of surrender, the color she had been given because someone needed her to believe that surrender was all she had to offer. Yes, she said. We will. They sat on the ridge for another hour, not speaking much, the bond running warm and clear between them, the territories spread below, the morning light changing as the sun moved. Then they rode back to the castle to finish what had been started. The evidence had been gathered for 3 years without anyone knowing it was being gathered. That was the thing Isolde kept returning to as she and Rourke and Lord Vane spent the following 2 days organizing everything into a sequence that could be presented clearly to the council. The extraordinary patience of what Seraphine had done, the long horizon of a plan that had begun 8 years ago with her mother's death and had been maintained through Isolde's father's decline, and the false healer examinations and the daily compound and the curse commissioned and placed on the betrothal night, and the slow, steady management of every person in the household who might have seen clearly if they had been looking. 4 years of inhabiting a house that had been carefully arranged around her diminishment. It would have worked. If Rourke had not stopped the ceremony. If Isolde had walked those 43 steps in white and spoken the words of release and been recorded by the court as the barren, surrendered, displaced woman who had stepped aside willingly. It would have worked. Rourke would have bonded with Verity, incompletely but formally, and the cold would have continued, and within a year or 2 it would have progressed beyond management, and the court would have mourned a young alpha dead of a mysterious wasting illness and installed Verity as the formal lunar regent, with Seraphine managing the succession from behind the position she had spent 8 years engineering. All of it balanced on one moment. One man descending altar steps toward a woman in white. She miscalculated one thing, Isolde said on the evening before the council session, sitting across from Rourke in the study where she had first read the healer's examination findings. What? She knew about the bond. She built the kill switch specifically because she knew the bond existed. But she assumed the bond suppression would hold. Isolde looked at the organized documents on the desk between them. The healer's findings, her mother's letter, the antidote vial, the detailed account of the curse's construction that she had written out from memory with Corva's teaching as reference. She assumed that if she suppressed the bond in both of us long enough, proximity without recognition would eventually produce resignation instead of connection. That would be close enough for years and never actually find each other. Instead, the suppression wasn't complete. The wolf can't be fully silenced. I dismissed mine for years, but it never stopped. She paused. And whatever the curse was doing to your ability to see me clearly, it couldn't stop you from knowing that something was wrong when I prepared to leave. Rourke looked at the documents. She underestimated the bond, he said. She underestimated what we'd do with it when we finally found it, Isolde said. Which is different. He looked at her. She held his gaze. Through the bond she felt his steadiness, the particular quality of a man who has been carrying something enormous and has finally been given someone to carry it beside him and has discovered that the weight is not less but the carrying is entirely different. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he agreed. She gathered the documents and went to prepare for the session that would end it. Section 9. The council session was called for the 2nd hour after dawn. Not the standard 3rd hour. Rourke had been deliberate about the timing. The 2nd hour was early enough that the court had not yet fully assembled into its daily social configurations, early enough that the informal networks through which information traveled fastest had not yet activated, early enough that Seraphine would have less time than she would have liked to prepare whatever counter-narrative she had been constructing since the petition failed to produce the delay she needed. Isolde dressed in deep green again. Not because she had run out of other choices. She had an entire wardrobe of things her stepmother had selected for her over 4 years. Garments in the muted colors Seraphine had always steered her toward, the particular palette of a woman being managed into visual insignificance. She had looked at all of them that morning and then reached for the green, which was her color, which had always been her color, which she was done setting aside because someone else found it inconvenient. Rourke was waiting for her at the top of the council corridor. He looked. She paused when she saw him, struck again by the change that 3 days of curse-free living had made visible. Not transformed. Still himself, still the severe and careful man she had been cataloguing from wrong distances for 3 years. But the grey undertone gone from his complexion, the careful energy management absent, the compressed quality of a man always working around pain replaced by something that was simply presence. He looked like the Alpha of Thornvale rather than a man performing the Alpha of Thornvale while dying. He looked at her in the green and said nothing, but through the bond she felt his response to it. Clear and warm and entirely uncomplicated by 3 years of curse-induced fog. "Ready?" she asked. "Yes," he said. They walked in together. The council chamber was full. All 12 council members, which was unusual for a session called with 2 days' notice. Someone had made certain the attendance was complete, and Isolde suspected Ferris, who had a gift for ensuring that the right people were in the right places at the right times without anyone being entirely certain how he had managed it. Seraphine stood by the window again. It was the same window as the first session, the same position, the same deliberate choice of standing over sitting, the same careful composure. But something was different this morning. Isolde saw it immediately and filed it. The composure was effortful in a way it had not been before. The surface was intact, but the effort required to maintain it was visible, just slightly, in the set of her shoulders and the precise stillness of her hands. She was afraid. She had been afraid since the declaration ceremony, and the fear had been growing with each day that passed without her intervention succeeding. And now it was the morning of the session that would determine whether her plan of 8 years survived or collapsed. And the fear was close to the surface in a way that all her considerable skill at concealment could not entirely bury. Verity was present also. She sat at the far end of the table, apart from the council members, in the posture of someone who has spent several days rearranging their understanding of a situation and has not yet arrived at a stable configuration. She looked at Isolde when she entered, a direct look, not hostile, not warm, something more complicated. The look of a woman who is beginning to understand that she was a piece in someone else's plan and is deciding how to feel about that. Isolde met her eyes briefly and nodded. Verity looked away. Rourke sat at the head of the table. Isolde took the chair at his right. He spoke first. He laid out the timeline with the precision of someone who had been organizing information for days and had reduced it to its essential structure. No excess, no drama, simply the sequence of events in the order they had occurred, each one supported by the documentation that would follow. The betrothal signing. The onset of the cold. 3 years of managed deterioration. The curse identified by Isolde on the day of the surrender ceremony. The independent healer examination and its findings. The compound in Isolde's blood and its 2 functions. The mother's sealed chambers and the letter and the antidote. The curse's architecture as Isolde had read and subsequently dismantled it, including the kill switch. The name of the woman who had constructed the curse and the nature of the commission. He spoke for 20 minutes without interruption. The council listened in the particular silence of people receiving information, that is reorganizing something they believed they understood. When he finished, Isolde stood. She opened the leather folder on the table in front of her and began. The curse placed on Isolde Rourke Ashvane was commissioned 8 years ago, she said. Her voice was level, the voice she had developed in 4 years of absorbing things quietly and dealing with them later, repurposed now for the opposite of absorption, for delivery, for clarity, for making certain that what she said could not be misheard. The commission was placed by Lady Isolde Varen, who paid for its construction and provided the specifications for its function. She laid the first document on the table. This is the contract, signed by the curse maker and by the commissioning party. The commissioning party's mark appears here. She pointed. 12 council members leaned forward. This is the payment record. Second document, dated 8 years ago, cross-referenced against Lady Seraphine's household accounts, which show a withdrawal of the corresponding amount in the same week. Third document. This is the specification letter. The curse maker's record of the commission's requirements as communicated by the client. It describes, in specific terms, a mate bond suppressor with a kill switch triggered by bond completion. It describes the slow deterioration timeline. It describes the intended outcome. She paused. The intended outcome was the alpha's death during or shortly after any bonding ceremony, appearing as a natural progression of the wasting illness that had been attributed to no known cause. The room was very still. This is the formulation record for the compound administered to me daily for 4 years. Fourth document. The compound's 2 functions are documented here, reproductive suppression and bond perception interference. The formulation was prepared by the same source and delivered to the same client. She looked up. The same client who presented me with the compound every morning and provided the healer's reports that established my apparent barrenness and encouraged me to accept the surrender of my claim. She set down the 4th document. She looked at Seraphine. Her stepmother had not moved from the window. Her expression was still, the composure intact, the effort required to maintain it no longer concealed, visible now to anyone who was looking at her with clear eyes. She was looking at the documents on the table with the expression of someone watching a structure they built carefully over years come down piece by piece. Lies, Seraphine said. Her voice was steady. Isolde gave her that. Fabricated documents, Seraphine continued. Produced by a woman who has every reason to manufacture evidence against the person standing between her and the position she wants. She looked at the council with the practiced ease of someone who has been persuading rooms for decades. The Alpha's betrothed, having narrowly avoided a legitimate displacement, now presents documents of unknown provenance that conveniently confirm every claim she needs confirmed. She paused. The council should ask itself who benefits. The documents were produced by the curse-maker herself, Isolde said. Independently, before any contact between us, as her own records of the commission. They were surrendered to me as part of a separate transaction. They have been filed in 3 independent archives, all of which predated this council session. She held her stepmother's gaze. They are not mine. I did not make them. I found them. And the curse-maker, said Lord Davin carefully. This person, can she be brought before the council? She can be contacted, Isolde said. She has indicated willingness to provide testimony if formally requested by Thornvale Council authority. She paused. She also confirmed, in direct conversation with me, the identity of the commissioning party and the specific nature of the commission. Her testimony would be that of a criminal, Seraphine said. A curse-maker for hire. Her word against mine. Your word against documents in your own handwriting, Isolde said. She laid the 5th document on the table. This is a letter found in your personal correspondence archive, she said. Written by you, addressed to your sister in the Northern Territories, dated 4 years ago. She did not read from it. She had memoized it, and she delivered it from memory, looking at the council rather than the paper. It describes the plan's progress. It describes my father's declining influence. It describes the compound being administered successfully and the healer reports being established. And it describes, she paused, the successful conclusion of the first phase, which it defines as the elimination of the primary obstacle. She looked at Seraphine. The primary obstacle was my mother, she said. Isolde Varen, who died 8 years ago of what was described as a wasting illness. Who died at the same time the curse on Alpha Rourke was commissioned. Who died because she carried the Searbond gift and would have been able to identify both the curse and the compound if she had been given time to find them. She kept her voice level. You killed my mother. You killed her before she could expose what you had done. And then you spent the following 4 years ensuring her daughter would never be in a position to do the same. The council chamber was entirely silent. Not the silence of uncertainty. The silence of a room that has received something definitive and is in the process of accepting its weight. Seraphine said nothing. For the first time in 4 years of careful management, Seraphine Varen had nothing to say. My mother was an Searbond gifted wolf, Isolde said. The gift passes through female lines. I carry it. It is how I identified the curse on Alpha Rourke. It is how I traced its construction and dismantled it. She paused. It is how I know, with the certainty of direct reading rather than inference, that what is documented in these papers is accurate. I read the curse myself. I felt its architecture. I can describe its construction in sufficient detail that any trained curse scholar can confirm the match against the specification letter. She looked at the council. I am not asking you to take my word for anything. I am asking you to look at the evidence and follow it to its conclusion. She sat down. Rourke rose. Lady Seraphine Varen, he said. His voice was quiet and entirely without heat, which was more effective than anger would have been. You are formally charged before this council with the murder of Isolde Varen, the deliberate cursing of a reigning Alpha of Thornvale, conspiracy to corrupt the Pack's succession, and the prolonged poisoning of a noble ward under your authority. He looked at her steadily. These charges carry the weight of the documentation presented. The council will deliberate. You will be held pending that deliberation. Seraphine looked at him. Then she looked at Isolde. It was a long look, not the calculating assessment Isolde had been receiving for 4 years, but something else. Something that Isolde read, with the clarity of the gift running fully for the first time, as the specific grief of someone who has spent years certain of the outcome and has just understood that the certainty was wrong. Then she looked away. Ferris moved. The guards moved. And Seraphine Varen, who had managed this household for 4 years with the precision of a woman who understood that power lives in small rooms and careful words, was escorted from the council chamber without resistance, without drama, without another word. The door closed. The council sat in the silence she left behind. Then Lord Davin cleared his throat. "The council will deliberate," he said. "We will reconvene in 2 hours." He looked at Rourke, and then at Isolde, and in his expression something that had been set in a particular configuration for years shifted incrementally. "The evidence presented will be reviewed in full." The council members filed out. Lord Vane remained until the room was empty except for the 3 of them. He looked at Isolde for a long moment. "Your mother," he said, "would have been, there are no sufficient words." He stopped, composed himself with the dignity of an old man who has learned to manage grief in public. "She would have been extraordinarily proud." Isolde looked at him. "I know," she said quietly. "I know she would have." He nodded once. Left. The door closed. In the silence, Rourke's hand found hers on the table. She turned her hand over and held it. Through the bond she felt him, the same steadiness she had felt since the curse lifted, the same warmth, and beneath it something new this morning, something that had been building through the presentation and the evidence and the moment Seraphine had looked away. Not triumph. Something more sober than triumph. The feeling of a man who has been fighting something for a long time and has just watched the fighting become unnecessary, and is trying to remember what it feels like when the ground is simply ground rather than something to be held. "It's done," she said. "Almost," he said. 2 hours. "Almost," she agreed. They waited. The council deliberated for 90 minutes. When they returned, Lord Davin read the findings in the careful measured language of formal proceedings, and the findings were what the evidence demanded they be: thorough, specific, leaving nothing ambiguous about what had been established and what consequences followed from it. Isolde Varen was found guilty on all charges. The penalty for the murder of a pack member and the deliberate cursing of a reigning alpha was death, under Thornvale law. The penalty for the prolonged poisoning of a ward was exile, had the other charges not superseded it. The council recommended formal execution, pending Alpha's confirmation. Rourke confirmed it. Verity, having been found to have had no knowledge of her mother's actions, was formally cleared of involvement. She sat through the reading of the findings with the expression of someone receiving information that is simultaneously relieving and devastating. The particular experience of discovering you were used by someone you trusted, that the position you were being elevated toward was built on a foundation that required other people's deaths. She looked at Isolde when the session concluded. "I didn't know," she said. Her voice was quiet and without defense, a statement of fact rather than a plea. "I know," Isolde said. "She told me you were stepping aside willingly, that it was your choice, that you were." She stopped. "I should have asked you directly. Years ago. I should have simply asked you." "Yes," Isolde said. "Not unkindly, but honestly. You should have." Verity absorbed this. "What happens to me now?" she asked. Isolde looked at her cousin. This woman who had been positioned as her replacement, who had been given a future built on manufactured foundations, who was now standing in the rubble of her mother's plan with no part in its construction and no roadmap for what came after. "That depends on what you want to build," Isolde said. "The pack is going to need people who understand what was done here and are committed to ensuring it can't happen again." She paused. "That could be you, if you choose it." Verity looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. Once. Slowly. The nod of someone making a decision they intend to keep. Isolde's father was the last. Lord Cavan Varen, who had not commissioned the curse, who had not known the full shape of what his second wife was doing, who had known something was wrong and had chosen the comfort of not looking rather than the difficulty of seeing, who had walked Verity down the aisle in the great hall and had looked briefly at his daughter in white and had looked away without acknowledgement. He came to her chamber that evening. She let him in. He sat in the chair by the window and looked at his hands and said nothing for a long moment. "I knew something was wrong with your mother's illness," he said finally. "The timing, the speed of it. I knew Seraphine had arranged the healers. I told myself they were explanations." He looked up. "I was a coward. I chose the easier thing and called it trust and let my wife die and my daughter be managed into nothing because looking away was simpler than looking at what was actually happening." Isolde looked at her father. She thought about everything she could say. The architecture of the anger she had been carrying, not just the 4 years of compound and false healers and managed diminishment, but the years before that, the years of watching him defer to a woman who had been systematically dismantling everything he was supposed to protect. "You didn't commission the curse," she said. "You didn't kill my mother. You didn't make me believe I was broken." She paused. What you did was fail to stop someone who was doing all of those things while you watched. She met his eyes. That is not nothing. But it is also not the same. And I am not ready to collapse the two into each other. Her father's eyes were wet. What do you need from me? He asked. I don't need anything from you right now, she said honestly. What I need is time. And I need you to stop looking away from things that are hard to look at. She paused. If you can learn to do that, we'll have more to talk about. He nodded. He left. She stood at her window and looked at the Thornvale territories in the evening light and felt, beneath the grief and the anger and the long exhaustion of 4 years of carrying too much, something else. Space. The specific spaciousness of a life that has been cleared of the things that were filling it without permission. She put her hand on the window glass and felt the cold of it. Ordinary cold. Just glass, just evening, just autumn in the territories. She let it be ordinary. Section 10. The execution took place at dawn, 3 days later. Neither Isolde nor Rourke attended. She had thought about it, had sat with the question the way she sat with difficult things, examining it from multiple angles without rushing toward a conclusion. Whether witnessing was something she owed her mother. Whether presence at the ending of the thing that had ended her mother was a form of honoring, or simply a form of punishment she was inflicting on herself by proxy. She decided against it. Her mother had not been a woman who believed in deriving anything from another person's suffering. She had believed in building, in the patient, deliberate construction of things worth having. Attending the execution would not build anything. It would simply close a door, and the door was already closing without her standing at it. Instead she rode to Marin's Crossing. She went alone, before the dawn had fully established itself, and arrived at Corva's small stone house as the sun crested the eastern ridge. The old woman opened the door before Isolde had finished tying her horse, which she had learned by now was simply how Corva operated. Aware of arrivals before they announced themselves, a quality Isolde recognized as the same gift expressing itself in its most developed form. It's done, Corva said. Not a question. It's done, Isolde confirmed. Corva stepped back and let her in. They sat by the fire in the workroom that was not a kitchen, and Corva poured something that was hot and slightly bitter and deeply restorative in the way of things that prioritize function over pleasantness, and they were quiet together for a while in the manner of people who understand that some mornings require sitting before they require speaking. Your mother would have come to me today too, Corva said eventually. After something like this. She always needed to put things somewhere outside herself before she could move forward. I know, Isolde said. I'm more like her than I knew. You're more like her than she knew, Corva said. Which is different. She looked at Isolde over her cup. She spent years worrying that she hadn't done enough to prepare you. That the time ran out before she'd given you what you needed. A pause. She would be relieved to see what you did with what she left. Isolde looked at the fire. She had been carrying her mother's death for 7 years in the form of grief that had no way specific to land. No cause, no responsibility, no shape to push against. Grief in that form was diffuse, spreading, the kind that seeped into everything because it had no defined edges. Now it had edges. Now she knew the shape of what had happened and who had made it happen and what it had cost. The grief was heavier now that it had edges. But heavier things could be set down more precisely. She left me everything she could, Isolde said. In the time she had. That's enough. Corva studied her. Is it? She asked. Not cruelly. With the directness of someone who understood that the easy answer and the true answer were not always the same. Isolde was quiet for a moment. It will be, she said. It's not enough yet. But it will be. Corva nodded, accepting this with the equanimity of someone who has sat with enough grief to understand its timeline. The gift, Corva said. How does it feel now? Post-bonding, post-curse, post-everything. Larger, Isolde said. Clearer. Like having a sense that was always present but always partially obstructed suddenly running without obstruction. She paused. I'm still learning the new parameters. You'll spend years learning the new parameters, Corva said, without apology. The gift grows as you use it. It doesn't have a ceiling you can see from where you're standing. She looked at her. What will you do with it? Isolde had been thinking about this since the council session. In the spaces between the formal proceedings and the verdict and the quiet aftermath, she had been turning the question over, what the gift was for, not in the abstract, but practically, in the specific context of the pack she was now formally part of, the territory she had looked at from the eastern ridge with the feeling of a landscape asking to be known. There are other wolves in Thornvale with cursed bonds, she said. Not placed by Seraphine, older than that. The kind of bond damage that accumulates over generations when pack conflicts aren't properly resolved. The kind that makes wolves misread their mates or miss them entirely. She paused. I want to find them. Work with them. Use what I can do for something that builds rather than just responds. Corva looked at her for a long moment. Something in the old woman's expression shifted. The sharp assessment softened briefly into something warmer and more personal. Your mother said something like that to me once, she said, when she was first coming into the gift. She said she wanted to use it to repair things. A pause. She ran out of time before she could. I know, Isolde said. I'm going to use mine. Corva held her gaze. Yes, she said. I believe you will. She rode back to Iron Vale in the mid-morning light. The territories looked different from horseback than they had from the eastern ridge, closer, more specific, the individual details of the landscape visible where before she had seen only breadth. The particular way the light fell through the Thornvale forest. The sound of the river that ran south of the castle, audible from the road in the stillness of a clear autumn morning. The village she passed through whose residents looked up as she rode and whose expressions, she noticed, had changed since the week before. Not suspicion. Not the careful neutrality that pack members adopt toward a figure whose status is uncertain. Something more direct, acknowledgement. The look of people who have received information about what had been done in their territory and are deciding what it means that the woman who uncovered it is now riding through their village on her way home. One woman, older, standing outside a baker's doorway with a basket on her arm, caught Isolde's eye and nodded. A single, deliberate nod. Isolde nodded back. She rode on. Rourke was in the stables when she returned. Not for any formal purpose. She could feel through the bond that he had simply wanted to be somewhere uncomplicated. Somewhere that required straightforward physical engagement rather than the careful navigation of a court still reorganizing itself after the session. He was working with one of the horses, something he apparently did when he needed to think, and he looked up when she rode in with the expression she was becoming fluent in, the one that registered her arrival and registered it as something specifically good, distinct from any other arrival, without requiring him to make that fact dramatic. How was Corva? He asked. Exactly what I needed, she said. She dismounted. He took her horse's reins without being asked and began untacking it beside his own, and she stood in the cool dim of the stables and watched him work. This man who had been dying by degrees for 3 years, who was moving now with the ease of someone who has rediscovered their own body, who was warm in a way that reached her even from across the stable aisle. The council has confirmed the formal proceedings are complete, he said. The verdict is recorded. The documentation has been accepted into the official territorial archive. He glanced at her. Lord Davin asked me to convey that the council considers the matter fully settled. Does he? She said. He also asked, with considerable circumspection, whether you would be willing to consult with the council on 2 existing pact disputes that have resisted conventional resolution for years. He looked at her. I told him that was your decision. What did he say to that? He seemed surprised that I considered it your decision. A pause. I explained that my mate's gift belongs to my mate. He is updating his frameworks. Isolde felt the warmth of the bond carry something through it. His satisfaction at having said this, the particular quiet pleasure of a man who has found the right words for something he believes firmly. Tell him yes, she said. I'll see the disputes. Rourke looked at her. You're going to change things, he said. Not a question. The statement of someone who has looked at a person clearly for the first time and understood what they are looking at. We're going to change things, she said. Together. That was the agreement. It was, he agreed. He finished with the horses and they walked back to the castle side by side through the autumn morning, and through the bond Isolde felt the rhythm of his thinking, already moving forward, already building, the mind of an alpha who has rediscovered the future after 3 years of managing only the present. She let her shoulder brush his as they walked. He let his hand find hers. 6 months after the council session, Verity came to her office. It had become an office in the way that things become what they need to be. The small room off the eastern residential wing that had been Isolde's private sitting room had gradually, over weeks, accumulated the materials of work. Books from her mother's chambers, relocated and catalogued. Notes from the 2 pact disputes Rourke had told Lord Davin she would see, both of which had yielded to the gift's reading within hours in ways that years of conventional mediation had failed to produce. Correspondence from 2 other territories whose alphas had heard, through the particular channels by which news travels in the wolf world, that there was a seerbond-gifted woman in Thornvale who was willing to work with cursed bonds. Verity knocked and entered without waiting, which was new. 3 months ago she would have waited for explicit permission. She was changing. Slowly, with the particular difficulty of someone dismantling habits of deference that had been installed over years, but changing. "There's a family in the South Village," she said. "A mating pair whose bond has been compromised since their pup was born. They've been told it's natural degradation. The male is losing the ability to feel his mate's presence through the bond. It's causing aggression he can't explain and she can't understand." She set a small folder on the desk. "I wrote up the details. I thought you should see them." Isolde looked at the folder, then at Verity. "When did you start doing this?" she asked. 3 weeks ago, Verity said. "After the second dispute. I thought, there must be more. Cases the pack has been dismissing as natural degradation or incompatibility that might actually be bond damage." She paused. "Was I wrong to look?" "No," Isolde said. "You were exactly right." She picked up the folder. "Sit down. Tell me what you found." Verity Saturday. She talked. Isolde listened with the gift gently running, not reading Verity's bonds. She would not do that without consent, but receiving the warmth of the information being offered, the genuine care that had motivated the looking. Verity had spent months reorganizing herself around the discovery of what her mother had done, and what she had built from the rubble of that reorganization was, it turned out, a talent for finding the people who needed finding. "I want to help with this," Verity said when she had finished. "Formally. Not as anything that was decided for me. As something I'm choosing." Isolde looked at her cousin. "Yes," she said. "I want that too." 8 months after the council session, Isolde discovered she was expecting. She told Rourke in the Eastern Ridge. She had brought him there deliberately, returning the gesture he had made when he showed her the territories from above, offering him this particular view for this particular moment. They sat on their horses in the morning light with the Thornvale lands spread below them, and she said it plainly, the way she said everything that mattered, and watched his face. He went very still. Then he dismounted, and she dismounted, and he held her face in both hands and looked at her with those pale green eyes that she knew now in every light and every mood and every degree of concealment and openness, and she felt through the bond the thing she had learned was the deepest note of him, that quality of someone standing at the edge of something they had given up expecting and finding it there anyway, real and solid, requiring not cautious hope but the full commitment of genuine belief. "I didn't let myself want this," he said. "Quiet, rough at the edges. For 3 years I didn't let myself want any of it. You, a future, a child. It felt like wanting things that were being taken from me only made the taking worse." "And now?" she asked. He looked at her. "Now I want all of it," he said, without managing how much, without limiting the wanting so the losing would hurt less. He pressed his forehead to hers. "I want all of it, Isolde, and I am done being careful with the wanting." She felt his wolf press warm and certain against hers through the bond. "Good," she said. "So do I." The child was born in the spring. They named her Elith. Not as memorial only, as continuation. As the statement that a name could be reclaimed from the context of loss and given a new life, a new presence, a new set of hands and eyes through which to exist in the world. Isolde Varen Ashvane, born in the spring of her parents' first year as true bonded mates, named for the grandmother she would never meet but whose gift she might one day carry. She had her father's pale green eyes and her mother's dark hair and an opinion about every aspect of her own existence that she communicated with impressive clarity from her first hours. "She has your certainty," Rourke said on the third night, walking the length of their chambers with the infant against his chest, his large careful hands managing her small certain weight with the focused attention of someone who has been given something irreplaceable and is treating it accordingly. "She has your stubbornness," Isolde said from the bed. "She's been awake for 3 hours because she decided she should be awake." "This is discernment," Rourke said, in the tone of a man defending a position he knows is indefensible but intends to maintain. "She's assessing her environment." "She's been assessing her environment for 3 hours. It's a thorough assessment." Isolde watched them, her mate and her daughter in the lamplight of their chambers, the territories dark and quiet outside the high windows, the bond between her and Rourke running warm and constant and clear in the way it had run every day since the curse lifted. She felt, in this moment, the particular quality of a life that has been cleared of the things that were filling it without permission and has been filled instead with things that were chosen. It was not uncomplicated. Her father was in the process of a slow and effortful reconstruction of himself that she was witnessing from a careful distance, neither rushing toward him nor turning away. Verity was 3 months into the formal bondwork program that she and Isolde had built together and was proving, as Isolde had suspected, to have a genuine talent for finding the people who needed finding. Corva visited twice a month and was teaching Elith's mother things that Elith's mother would one day teach Elith, if Elith carried the gift, which Isolde suspected she would. The two-pack disputes had resolved cleanly. The correspondence from other territories was growing. The council was updating its frameworks, gradually, with the particular pace of institutional bodies that move slowly but move genuinely when the evidence demands it. There was more to do. There would always be more to do. "We're not done," Rourke had said once. "We'll never be done. We'll do it together," she had answered. He crossed the room now and sat on the edge of the bed beside her, and Elith, apparently having completed her thorough 3-hour assessment of her environment, closed her pale green eyes and went to sleep with the absolute decisiveness of someone who has made a choice and is committing to it fully. "Finally," Rourke said quietly. "Don't move," Isolde said. "If you move, she'll know." He went very still, with the focused, precise stillness of a man who has learned to hold important things carefully. Isolde leaned her head against his shoulder. Through the bond she felt him, the warmth of him, the steady, unhurried beat of a heart that was no longer fighting anything, the deep, settled quality of a man who has found what he was looking for and has stopped searching and started simply living inside the finding. She thought of a woman in a white dress counting steps. 43 steps to an altar she had almost surrendered at. She thought of her mother's letter, the words written in haste by a woman who was running out of time, who had prepared what she could and hidden it where her daughter would find it when she was ready, who had believed in a future she could not see clearly enough to describe but trusted enough to prepare for anyway. Become it anyway. Become all of it. The lamp burned low. Outside the high windows, the Thornvale territories lay quiet in the spring dark. The forest, the river valley, the border ridges, the villages with their smoke and their lives and their bonds, some whole and some damaged and some in the slow, patient process of being repaired by a woman who had learned what she was capable of and had decided to be all of it. Elith breathed steadily against her father's chest. The bond ran warm and clear. Isolde closed her eyes. "Home," her wolf said. "Yes," Isolde agreed. "Home."